countdown to the last comic shop in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, can we all do a hey together for our 200th, please?
They're so enthusiastic.
I know, right?
No, you do it, and then we'll follow up.
And now from a shotgun shack on the other side of the world, it's the Last Comic Shop Podcast's 200th episode celebration.
Hey!
No. Hey!
Hey now!
Hey! It is now time for something we have teased long time. It is our 200th episode of the Last Comic Shop Podcast!
That's right. And just like one of those shops down at the beach with the permanent going out of business sale sign on the window,
we're going out of business! We're officially announcing our retirement.
We run out of hay. All these damn horses. No, we're keeping the lights on for people that stumble in and are interested in hay. No, that's not it.
You don't know how to start a show. It's only our 200th episode.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I'm the host.
Have you guys run out of material?
That could be the case. I'm the host with the most, Andy Larson. I'm joined by Chad Smith and Jay Scott, who I've gone through a lot of material with. Over 200 episodes. Guys, are we ever going to retire? I mean, Chad, if you want to think about the old show plus this show, we've done close to like 500-something episodes. It's like ridiculous how much stuff we've got out there. But long story short, Chad, do you ever want to stop reviewing comics via podcast?
Listen, buddy, really just snookered you into a comic book club. I'm real happy to read a book once a week and talk about it.
Now, it does bring up a valid question. When you're podcasting, is it better to burn out or to fade away?
Ooh. J.A., when would you like to retire, sir?
Can I retire now? Then I don't have to talk about this book?
Why does he not want to talk about this book?
No, I take that back. I want to talk about this book, and to pull back the curtain a little bit, we've already talked about half of it. So let's get the rest out of the way.
Yeah, they don't know. That's the beginning of the show.
That's spliced together.
That's the magic behind the scenes.
Listen, you know that internet meme with Dr. Manhattan where it's like it's 2006 and we're talking about Watchmen. It's 1984 and we're talking about Watchmen. That's the show. We've recorded all these different parts. It was October and we're talking about Watchmen. It was April, talking about Watchmen. Chad is at the beach at his in-laws' house, and we're talking about Watchmen.
Wasn't that spread out, wasn't it?
It was pretty spread out.
It was very much. We were very much channeling Dr. Manhattan in that issue. Was it issue 10?
I recorded Watchmen episodes in a parking lot of a gas station in the middle of the forest. And here I am back in Chad Central for another edition of the Watchmen.
Well, and it is true. We are reviewing Watchmen for our 200th episode, and we've got a cavalcade of special guests. And as a result of having guests and people's schedules, I did have to record certain issues out of order. Because, again, we have 4 guests on today's show, starting off with the beautiful, the magnificent Nicole Larson, who is my wonderful wife, who has been on a ton of episodes where we've talked about very serious topics, right? She's on a lot of serious episodes. And so I wanted to give her the first 3 issues of Watchmen. So I saved them for her.
What a nice present.
I know, right? The man that keeps giving.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's better than a diamond ring, baby.
I don't know about that.
You could put it that way, but also, Nicole, that meant you just had to read 3 issues if that's all you wanted to read. Had you had to read like the last 3 issues, then you kind of have to read the entire book so you know what happens in the run-up to those last 3 issues. You don't have that.
See, that was part of my deal. Yeah. I knew that you wouldn't want to read a ton, so I just gave you 3 issues.
And I will say that I'm pretty sure Watchmen was not the first, but amongst the first comics that I ever read, and I remember being very confused and having to ask you a lot of questions.
Okay.
And I do not feel that way this time.
Wow.
I had it down.
That's right. She did. She also was very confused as to why I had several copies of it. She's like, why do you have this hardback copy now? I'm like, Chad found it at Ollie's.
He has a soft cover, the whole thing. Then he has just the first 3?
No, all of them.
You have all of them.
Yeah, I have
all of them individual issues in hardback.
Those are the recolored Absolute Edition ones.
Yeah, well, they're taking up space on my wall, is all I gotta say.
And I was going to get the small compact version. I really was. I really do love those compact DC things that they've been putting out. So I was going to get that, but then I was just like, nah.
How much does a first printing of that go for these days, of issue number 1?
Oh, gosh. You know what? I think we were at Hershey Comic Con last year, and wasn't Mikey putting together a run of those issues? Yeah. So he... Yep. I don't know about number 1, but he found a lot of the other issues at Hershey Comic Con for pretty cheap, honestly. They weren't that expensive. Now, number 1, I think he got a deal from some guy who gave him issue 1 for $60. But Chad, you've got some eBay numbers. It looks like you're looking it up. What does it go for on eBay?
Do we want CGC or do we just want raw?
Oh, let's give the fans both of them.
Let me do some computation. All right, so it looks like currently, at this mysterious time in which we're recording this, I will not reveal, you could have a copy of Watchmen number 1 in the raw for somewhere between $30 and up, or you could go with the CGC. There's one currently with 8 days left, a 9.8er for $473. So really, it's going to vary on your condition and what you're looking for. But
absolutely,
it's not too bad. I will say I have 11 of the 12 issues that I found for $5 or less a piece. Okay. So it's that issue number 1. That's the only one I still need to get. And so, yeah, between $30 and $40, not too bad.
So you can own your own issues of Watchmen if you want to. If you want to go out there, maybe you're one of these folks, by the way, that has been watching the Watchmen cartoon that has been making all the buzz. I have not watched this thing because, simply put, it's not on any of the streamings. You have to buy it, and I'm like, I ain't doing that. Forget that. I ain't buying a Blu-ray, please. I haven't bought a Blu-ray in years. I'm not doing that.
What is this? 2017?
Exactly. So, if you're thinking that we're going to be talking about at all any of the cartoon version, which is kind of just like a fancy version of the motion comic they released several years back, at least in my opinion, that ain't happening.
We'll save that for another show.
Yeah.
For now, it's our 200. We wanted to celebrate with a big old fancy book, and Andy loves The Watchmen.
Yeah.
And I thought that'd be fun to have our guests read all that stuff. So
right. So real quickly, J.A., who did The Watchmen? Who was involved with The Watchmen project overall?
Okay, so The Watchmen, very famously written by Alan Moore, everybody's favorite curmudgeon, writes some great stuff and then hates it. And
That's right.
Hates everyone to do anything with it.
They made Watchmen babies, so...
Illustrated and lettered by David Gibbons with colors by John Higgins. And then, depending on the edition, you've got various DC editors. The reason why Alan Moore, by the way, is angry is because I think he wrote some contract that it would fall back to him at some point if it ever goes out of print. And it's never going out of print. DC's pulling a Sony, and they're just going to put out bad versions of the Watchmen so that they retain the Watchmen.
No. That's I disagree. It's still in print because people are still buying it. It is one of the few graphic novels that I see almost at every Target.
Oh no, I didn't mean the bad version of this book. I just meant the Watchmen as a serious thing. You get the Doomsday Clock. You have the HBO series. There's Before the Watchmen. That was a thing. So these are all sort of varying in scale of importance or connection, relevance to what we are reading. And they also reprint the Watchmen in various forms. Absolute Edition, Deluxe Edition, Ultimate Edition, because, as you said, it is such a seminal piece.
And it's worth noting, the original 12 issues were released starting, 1986?
Mm-hmm.
And having collected editions on the shelves, that was not common at that time. When I jumped into comic books after the Batman movie, you had a handful of Frank Miller Batman, The Dark Knight Returns, you had The Watchmen, and not a lot else in terms of collected editions on the shelf. So when Alan Moore signed that contract that said the rights would revert back, after it went out of print, not only would he be surprised by the success, but just the fact that it wasn't done at the time. They didn't collect comics like that, and they haven't stopped ever since.
Well, what my point is, this isn't a malpractice thing with the Disney Plus subscription thing. Alan Moore did this. It was work for hire. He signed the contract, wanted to use the Charlton characters originally. He came up with these characters. I mean, it's a good book. So the fact that it hasn't gone out of print, I still stand by. It's like it's not going out of print because people keep reading it. So,
and it is a gateway comic. I think Nicole mentioned it was one of the first comics she read. It's the one that people hold up the mirror to and say, "Oh, this is great comic bookery." And Andy, you alluded to the digest form. They just came out with that manga-sized digest, which, oh my goodness, the print is so small on this, and I'm getting so old. I don't think I'm going to be able to handle this digest. I need it bigger, not smaller. But it's a great book. That's why it's there.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and get to Nicole. She's going to give us the 10-cent synopsis for what happens in the first 3 issues of Watchmen. So, Nicole, what happens?
I didn't know I was going to be tasked with this.
Wow. Well,
all right. So you got this group of superheroes, and they're kind of looking back in time when they, it's many years later when they are kind of being forced out of society essentially by law, saying that they can't be who they are. And they're kind of looking back because one of them gets killed. And then they're kind of exploring some of the interpersonal relationships between them, some unresolved issues, and then you got a blue guy who ends up going to Mars.
That is a great 10-cent synopsis.
I mean,
yeah,
there's a lot to unpack in these first 3 issues. There's a lot. It's a complicated story, but again, very digestible for someone like me who doesn't know all the history and written into
continuity.
The continuity. You guys call it something. The timeline. Anyway, the accepted timelines of other.
The canonical timeline.
Whatever. Anywho, because it's its own book within itself.
Right. But yeah, you're right. This is all about who killed the comedian. There's a guy named the Comedian who is one of the few superheroes that's still allowed to work within the United States because he works for the federal government as, I don't know.
And we should point out that while we're calling them superheroes, none of them actually have any powers, with the exception of Dr. Manhattan. He's the only one that actually has
That's
superpowers.
The blue guy, for anyone who was wondering.
Everybody else is just a costume vigilante.
The blue guy.
And let's mention the blue guy is ripped and he walks around naked. But he looks real fine in a suit too.
Yeah, wow! I didn't know that you had.
Oh, a man in a good suit? Yeah.
Well, I just didn't know you had, like, you were looking at Dr. Manhattan like that.
How could you not?
There you go, Andrew. There's your Halloween costume for this year.
Yeah,
shave your head.
Get a bunch of spray paint.
We could just spray paint you, yeah.
Yeah, spray paint me blue.
And not to spoil things, but at least on a couple pages, he's performing manly duties while also simultaneously, having made multiples of himself, continuing his work in the lab. Yeah, and there was multiples of him doing manly duties.
Okay.
Don't you remember that?
I do.
A menage a bleu.
It was big. So this is not the first time that we've all read Watchmen, so I think that it would be nice to start off this particular review of Watchmen talking about things that we may have pulled out from this reading of Watchmen that you may not have pulled out from previous ones. Now, one thing that Nicole commented to me on is it looked like that Silk Spectre, Lori, was smoking pot when she was talking to her mom.
So she's smoking something, and it's like this globe-like thing, and you see her stuffing this wad of green stuff in it, and then she's lighting underneath it. Now, I don't know much about the drugs, but is that pot that she's smoking? I don't know. Because it doesn't look like Andrew's like it's just a cigarette.
I thought it was just a cigarette. Guys, cigarette or pot.
I mean, I've never seen a globe cigarette.
I've actually looked this up, and I think it's meant to be cigarettes. Like she's smoking loose tobacco, but it really looks like a crack pipe. It doesn't. That's what it looks like.
Okay,
it looks like a crack pipe. And that's
Yeah,
why
I
I
don't
looked
know
it
the
up,
drugs,
because
but
it looks
like,
like
is that
it looks like a glass crack pipe
Okay.
from the 80s. And maybe Gibbons was making some sort of reference to the burgeoning crack epidemic at the time.
Maybe. Who
When
knows?
did the crackdown on Big Tobacco start? Was it early enough in the 80s that would have been a sticking point where he's trying to say, hey, this is just as bad? Or
I mean, you can read into it. I still thought it was just a cigarette, but then she showed me the picture, and I'm like, yeah, I guess maybe it's one of those fancy things. Maybe Dr. Manhattan made it for her so that, I don't know, she could smoke crack in public and nobody would say anything.
Notice the
I don't know. All right. Chad, one thing that you picked out from this time reading through these first 3 issues.
something I picked up. Can I make an admission? And this is going to follow through for all of the rest of our recordings. I did not, nor have I ever read the back matter text pages. And I
never.
Oh,
The 5 chapters of Hollis's
Under the Hood. No,
book?
no, thank you.
So I have to say, the first time I read this, that was like the saving grace for me. I'm like, oh my gosh, thank goodness I can actually understand something. Because I think that's the thing that is very different for me this time reading it, is that I know how to read comics now, right? Whereas I was very confused before because, people are masked in one frame and then they're older, and like it was very hard for me to keep up with the illustrations and who was who and what was happening and what timeline we were in. And now I know how to read comics better. I just know how the flow of it goes and how to decipher those things. But yeah, those other back pages were my saving grace the first time around.
okay.
Really? I would just skip through and if Dollar Bill is important enough to be in the book, I don't about Dollar Bill.
Yes.
What I found interesting is the reason why they have all this back matter in the Watchmen is that DC was unable to sell advertising for this book, and they didn't want to put in a letters page, so they had to fill out these pages with something. So the editors decided, let's add in all this back matter that's been created.
Oh yeah, I know you're right, because there was some arcane rule around. That's why they included letter columns in comic books, because they couldn't put them on newsstands or something, because if they did, they had to have like a page of printed text, or so without a letters column. Yeah, you're right. They would have to put it in elsewhere. All right. Yeah, I didn't think of that. But yeah, I'm like Chad. I've never read a lick of these. So this time around, I decided to. I was just like, I'm going to attempt to read some of these things. And I honestly didn't get anything more out of it or less out of it. I think the big thing that I got happened in issue 2. There's this conversation with Lori and her mom, and they're talking about the comedian who dies. And later on, I'm living in a segment that we recorded previously, but will show up later, where you find out what's going on with Lori and the comedian. And so even as early as those particular issues, you can see that Lori's mom not really upset with the comedian, despite the fact that he tries to sexually assault her. And it's because, like, they have a kid. It was the first time I picked it up, right?
I picked up how much the comedian changed, not in terms of his personality, because I think that always was pretty consistent, but his outward appearance, from being sort of this 1940s colorful costumed character with a domino mask to this leather-clad sort of stormtrooper with jack boots and a gimp mask.
Yeah.
And you could see the progression. I mean, obviously Dave Gibbons made this specific allusion to this man, his inner fascism and anger sort of being exposed on the outside as he gets older and older and more curmudgeonly,
He's
of an
just
asshole.
seen a lot of stuff. Like, he's been asked to do a lot of stuff, and he's done it. And so I was trying to pay attention to if there was any change in the comedian once Lori was born. Having a daughter, even though he doesn't have a relationship with her, just the notion that he has one, like, softened him at all?
So wait a second. You guys are talking about stuff that happens after what I read. Right? Because when I read it, the mom was with her agent dude that she married, and they said that's when she had the kid. Because I thought the same thing, like, oh, is it the comedian and that's the daughter? Because I didn't remember from before.
No, we're doing this all out of order. So that's later in the series.
Okay.
And the other thing that I was struck with by the comedian is, so he's based a lot on Peacemaker.
Right.
I had not read any Peacemaker the first time or the second time I read Watchmen. This time I had read various Peacemaker books for this show. So seeing the comedian through that lens of Peacemaker, sort of mixed with, I guess, a bit of Nick Fury and some Marvel characters, was interesting to me to see where Alan Moore took that idea and moved it and stretched it with sort of this nihilist, fascist type of comic book character. Somebody who's so ruthless and cynical.
Yeah, if you look at things from a realistic perspective, what type of human is going to go out there and punch people for a living, in a leather gimp suit?
Right.
These people, that was the whole point of Alan Moore, is just showing how messed up these people were, taking that to the nth degree. Not the whole point, but a big one.
Yeah.
Just like Dr. Manhattan, which I will say too, Andy, one thing that I did pick up on this time was how emotional Dr. Manhattan was at the beginning of the story, because the whole story is about him distancing himself from humanity. And that issue 3 is he's learning about, what he's caused, or, the people that are suffering. One, the fact that he wasn't aware, because he seems so aware of everything else that's going on later on in the story.
Yeah.
He's like, what? You didn't tell me? And, he
Well, that's also because it's not true, right?
Is it not true?
I don't think it is. No, I think Ozymandias gave everybody the cancer. I think that was the whole part of his plan. He gave everybody else and then he blames it on Dr. Manhattan to get Manhattan out of the picture.
How is he not aware? If he's aware of so many other things, why doesn't he know?
Well, I think that goes back to the whole notion that Dr. Manhattan doesn't understand. In the years since this book has been released, we found out a lot about the autistic spectrum and things like that. And I really do feel like, based on the way that even Dr. Manhattan was before, when he was just John Oster, as you'll find out later, in his obsession with clocks and rebuilding things and stuff like that, I really feel like he was probably on the spectrum. His inability to deal with other human beings is kind of part of that. And that didn't change once he had to rebuild himself. It actually became worse. He became more detached from things. I just, that's my take on it. And so I think, again, this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, and he doesn't understand anything anymore. After this all happens, he's like, what? I didn't know I gave people cancer. But I think it's actually more the people's, they all yelled at him. They were all throwing things at him and stuff. The other thing that I think I got from it, and I was wondering what Nicole thought about this, is a lot of people take away from Watchmen Rorschach. For better or for worse, he's one of the central characters throughout the entire book. And that kind of is underscored from the first issue, in which he's the one that kind of introduces you to the rest of the cast. He's the one that's he's investigating this. He introduces you all the other main players. And so for the first, at least two to three issues, until Dr. Manhattan comes in issue 3, you're kind of seeing the world through Rorschach's
diary.
Yeah, it's his point of view for the most part. You're spending a lot of time with him. And so Rorschach, like him, don't like him? What do you think of Rorschach? He's very divisive.
It's clear that he's an oddball out of the group, right? I don't know how to expound on that more, but just from kind of the way people are reacting to him. But the driving force of why they're even looking into the comedian's death, no one else is really taking the onus on themselves to figure out who's coming after them, and he's trying to warn everyone else. And so I don't know. I don't have anything against him. I don't remember what happens after these issues, so I don't know if I'm supposed to like him or not.
He's just very divisive now. He's seen as one of those characters similar to the Punisher, where people like him for the wrong reasons.
He's not hot like the Punisher. That's why I like the Punisher. Somehow I always come on this show and talk about the dude.
Yeah, you do. You do.
I don't know why.
We didn't even get to the Tijuana Bibles yet.
That's right. We didn't. Anything else you guys picked out of this this reading this time through.
I do think Watchmen is a book that rewards rereading. It does help me every time I go through it. The who's it's and the where's it's and the what's it's and the why's it's do become, a little bit clearer. Whether it was the Minutemen versus the Crime Busters, and like who's on what timeline where, and how that factors in later on in the story where you have, Hollis and Sally are still out there and not much else from the Minutemen. But there are still other Crime Busters, like that's the Watchmen group that isn't really a group. And then every time I read, I still have more questions about some of the characters and their interactions. And
Chad, did you pay more attention to the Black Freighter stuff, or no? You still glossed over.
Eyes glazed.
I love the Black Freighter. It starts in issue 3, runs issue 3, 5, 8, 10, and 11, and I like the whole conceit that because there are real costumed heroes, people don't want to read in comic books about costume heroes, so they read about pirates. Pirates in the Watchmen universe are the superhero heroes because there are real costumed heroes. Nobody wants to read about them, so they read about pirates instead.
Yeah, but as of issue 3, my eyes were still glazed over. I'm sure by the time we get to maybe issue 7 or issue 8 or 9 or one of those issues, I'll start to warm up a little bit.
All right. Well, I was trying to pay attention to it because it's evidently supposed to be very similar to the origin story of Ozymandias. It's supposed to be, again, the story about somebody that sees terribleness and decides to do even more terribleness in reaction to that. So I was trying to, and then it turns out instead of paying more attention to the Black Freighter, I was actually paying more attention to the storyline between the newspaper guy and the kid that was like sitting by the thing trying to keep warm reading the comics, because he's like, "Can I borrow your cap?" I didn't even notice that the first couple times I've read this. But he asks for his cap, and then it's not until like he finds out that the war is going to come. The guy's like, "Yeah, here, take the comic, take the cap, do whatever you want, because it doesn't matter anymore." And I just,
is Ozymandias' point.
Yeah,
give people something to unite around, and then all of a sudden, a lot of our smaller problems and differences go away.
Nicole, anything that you picked up this time around?
I mean, I already mentioned the Menage a Blue. All the extra hands on her face.
Didn't you think that was weird?
I mean, sounds kinky to me.
Were you surprised by her reaction? Just in this world where there's a lot of weird stuff going on.
Yeah, I mean, he could have pulled it off better. I mean, if you want to go that route, just make it like very obvious and then just show her that it blows her mind. I think what really got her, though, was finding out that another version of him was out doing his lab work or whatever in the other room.
Yeah. I think that's the Prime version, was the guy doing the lab work. He's doing the important stuff while the other ones are tending to, husband.
Yeah. They're all the Prime one. And they're all the secondary one. That's the point.
Yeah, I don't know. She should have been more excited about the two in the bedroom, but yeah.
She had her eyes closed. She didn't know what was going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it scared her more the first time, right? It was just like, she didn't know. And then, when she found the guy doing the lab work, she was like, "F you." Oops, I'm sorry. I'm not supposed to say that.
But then she runs away to Night Owl, who's a great character that we haven't talked a lot about, but they sure do make a Night Owl look kind of frumpy in these first couple of issues, until that scene where they kick ass on all the people in the alleyway. And then Dave Gibbons draws him a little bit more, I don't know, like an action man.
But like, they're older, right? Like, she's not, Lori's not, because she's the kid of one of the original Minutemen people, right? But isn't he the night? Well, I guess no, he's the second iteration.
Yeah, he's the second Night Owl. He's based.
But I still think of him as being much older than her.
Yeah, I mean, and it's what Rorschach is warning about, where like people have let themselves go, they're getting soft. Night Owl's the embodiment of that, where, he isn't up on his crime fighting duties or his crime fighting regimen. He has gone soft and, gotten fatter and all that other stuff.
He's just
stuff.
Fading away. He hasn't burned out. He's fading. He's burned out and he's fading away.
Well, I wouldn't say he's fading away. He's fattening away. Now, it's just, compared to some of the other adaptations, like if you watch this and then you obviously watch the Zack Snyder thing, right? Like that was one of the big things that bothered me about the Zack Snyder, is how like cut they made Night Owl, which is fine because like superheroes, you're used to seeing them, and they're these cut awesome individuals. Dan Dryberg is just a frumpy dude in this, kind of like Clark Kent without any Superman. He just doesn't look right. But then there's like that scene where they fight in this alleyway, and he's like completely drawn differently. It's like night and day. He doesn't miss a beat as he's like, I don't know, breaking somebody's nose, punching with 2 fingers, which I was just like, what kind of move is that?
K.O. That's push the nose up into the brain.
That's right. So let's go ahead and wrap this up by saying, what do we rate the first 3 issues of Watchmen? Are we going to even do that on this thing?
It seems really weird.
It does seem really weird that you would rate these.
Let's break format. It's our 200th episode. We can do what we want.
Okay. How about we'll do this? We already know what Nicole's favorite scene in this entire first 3 issues. Real quickly, Chad J.A., name your favorite part of the first 3 issues.
I liked when Dr. Manhattan went on television and the producer is like, oh, you're not blue enough for TV. So he makes himself bluer.
I did like that.
Chad?
I like Dr. Manhattan getting ready and just his suit walking out of the closet, just ready to go.
Yeah.
See, everyone's gravitating to the blue dude.
I don't know. I always like these first couple issues for the actual real investigation work that Rorschach is performing.
Andrew likes the fascist detective.
No, I do not. But I like the fact that he finds out that there's the hidden door in the comedian's room because he measures the wall versus where the cabinet is, and he's like, oh, there's got to be something behind there. I like how he questions people. I like how he goes and talks to all of the characters in the first issue. I genuinely think, I know that later on you find out some things about Rorschach, and he becomes, some people like him for the wrong reasons. But in these first couple issues, he's a little unhinged, but he's actually a very competent superhero. He's doing the Batman thing, and he's doing it well. They go to the Crime Busters meeting, and he actually sounds like fairly with it. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea to pool resources, but too big of a team. Me and Night Owl just hang out together. And then later on, there's a scene with the comedian where Night Owl's talking to the comedian. He's like, yeah, something happened to him 3 years ago after that one case. And he hasn't been the same since. He just keeps to himself. It's setting the table for eventually the dark path that Rorschach will go down. But I just think in these first couple issues, I like him. Damn it, I like him. He's a pretty cool detective in these first couple issues.
Just eating his cold can of beans.
But he's not as hot as the blue guy.
Definitely not. That mask is cool, though. Gotta love the mask.
Yeah. Any case, we'll be right back with more of The Last Comic Shop right after these commercial breaks. Thank you so much to Nicole Larson for coming on our show and talking about this. Will you come back in a couple weeks to do another show with us?
Sure, as long as it's not a depressing book.
How about one about vampires in the Marvel Universe?
Is it going to be like True Blood, like sexy vampires?
I don't know. Blade's a pretty sexy vampire. Any case, stay tuned for issues 4 through 6 and Ethan Larson right after this.
So Andrew, we know what you can get Nicole for Christmas. It's tickets to the Blue Man Group.
Hey, this is David from the Shonen Flop podcast. I want to say congratulations on 200 episodes. That is an awesome milestone. We are so excited for you, and here to 200 more. And if you want to check us out, you can find Shonen Flop at shonenflop.com. That's SHONENFLOP.com. BCWsupplies.com has everything a comic collector could need. Boards, bags, long boxes, and so much else for our ever so increasing collections. And you can save 10% on your total order by using promo code LCSPOD at checkout. Not only does this take 10% off BCW Supplies' already low prices, but it supports my favorite podcast, The Last Comic Shop. So get all your collecting gear at BCWsupplies.com and save 10% on your order with promo code LCSPOD at checkout. That's LCSPOD at checkout. Happy hunting!
This is Ted Sikora from Hero Tomorrow Comics, writer of Bloom, The Origin of a Prophet. Congratulations to the Last Comic Shop podcast for hitting their 200th episode. That is an amazing milestone. Big thanks from the independent comics community. We love you, and here's to another 200.
And we're back. Here we go. We have our next chunk of Watchmen, and we are bringing along for the ride this time one of our favorite guests, Mr. Ethan Larson.
How are y'all doing tonight?
Yeah, we're doing great. We're glad you're here. The other Larson brother, man, been through the ringer with us, walked through the fire, reading all these books. You were on the old show. You're on this show. Man,
I'm on all the shows.
You are on all the shows.
Every show that you've ever done in your entire life, Andy, I think I've been on. So,
well, not just you, but JA too. Like I've had to drag you both kicking and screaming into all my projects. Well, thank you so much for joining us for Watchmen issues 4 through 6. These are my favorite issues. Like this is I guarantee.
I don't know what that says about you. Holy hell! Give me any more depressing stuff. Like, could you have just given me like one of those Eisner Award winner things that JA makes you read about, like oil pads or
all the sad stories about people and their ennui in the middle of the Canadian oil deserts.
Okay, yeah, they're a little bit depressing, but they're also very dramatic. Like, again, these issues, you're talking about the origin of Dr. Manhattan, and you're talking about the origin of Rorschach. I think, arguably, the two most important characters.
Outside of Ozymandias.
Well, yeah.
He's the plot device.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you think of the iconic characters from Watchmen, right, you immediately think big blue guy with the face in the...
I had a different third word, but big and blue were the first two.
Nicole's not on this segment, Chad. We can't talk about dongs.
All right.
I think that these are the issues that talk about those two characters that have now become synonymous with this particular book. Now, Ethan, you've never read Watchmen up until this point, right?
No, I've just seen the Zack Snyder movie. And even then, I think I was the only one who didn't fall asleep while we watched it.
And you still wanted to read this on your... You are a good brother.
And actually, because the main reason I wanted to read it was because of my favorite part. You asked me what issues I wanted to read. Maybe this is my own fault. So I said, I wanted to read the part where Rorschach gets the guy with the hot grease and then says, I'm not in here with you. You're in here with me.
Were you disappointed when you read it and you found out it's somebody recounting the scene? It's the doctor talking into his tape recorder or whatnot, as opposed to actually seeing the scene as in the movie.
Extremely disappointed. Zack Snyder gets shit on a lot. He nailed that visual. He nailed that whole scene, honestly. I think he did a better job with that. Some of the times that I was reading this, I was kind of comparing the movie between the book, and I think the movie obviously leaves out a lot of stuff, like this whole Dr. Manhattan story. I think he just kind of glosses over it, if I remember correctly. He nails this, the Rorschach story.
I was going to say that's his sensibility, is the whole Rorschach mindset. Right. That's cool for Zack Snyder.
Yeah, but I will say this. I think even in retrospect, the casting of Jackie Earle Haley, is that what his name is? The actor who played Rorschach? I mean, other than getting, the Walking Dead dude to play comedian.
Negan.
Negan.
Which he didn't really have a ton of screen time. I recall just thinking that was picture perfect casting at the time. He was lanky. He looked mean, and I remember getting genuine chills in the movie theater, when you get to that scene that we'll talk about in issue 5, where the police finally arrest him, and he's like, "Give me back my face!" Man, the visceral reaction. I think he nailed it in the movie. I don't know, Chad, you hate the movie. Do you agree with me at least that some of the casting was pretty good?
I said this from the jump. I think Zack Snyder is an excellent cinematographer, and those parts were spot on. The look, even the stuff that was a little off book, like making the superhero costumes into like 2000s era movie superhero costumes. I thought it all fit. My problem was just that was the movie that taught me, like, you can be super accurate with a thing, and that doesn't mean it's good. It's very pretty, but it's not a great movie.
Yeah, it has zero substance other than like he nails a couple scenes here and there. 3 hours of no substance. I don't know how you.
That's all. It's a lot.
Yeah, I honestly
seen the movie. Did the pirates show up?
They made an additional DVD with the whole animated pirate story. So
yeah.
Okay.
If you wanted more, 3 hours.
I always thought that it might have worked better as a television series, to be very blunt. That would have been more in Zack Snyder's wheelhouse, to be like, I'm going to take every single issue and just make an hour-long episode about that issue and do your scene for scene, whatever. But like to cram it into 3 hours and then put it out, I don't know. I think it was a little bit excessive, and people were like, why would I sit through 3 hours of anything? Why would you?
Like one of their limited engagement series. I could see that working.
Yeah. And I mean, that's what they're trying to do with this new animated series version, which again, I took a look at it and I don't see a lot of differences between it and like the motion comic book that they put out several years back. I mean, it is what it is, but whatever. Any case, let's get into our 10-cent synopsis of issues 4 through 6, and we're going to look at J.A. Scott to provide us with that 10-cent synopsis. So, Jay, what happens in
issue 4 is all about Dr. Manhattan. It is the actual Watchman episode because he is a watchman. His father fixed watches.
I did not make that connection that, he's the Watchman.
Yeah. My favorite issue in this entire book, because it happens at all different times, because Dr. Manhattan, once he becomes Dr. Manhattan, experiences time all at once. So we get to a bit of insight into that, where he's reliving various different aspects of his life all at the same time, all on the same page. And you have his origin story, how he became the only superhuman in the Watchmen universe by stepping into a particle destabilizer. I forget, what's it called? It's not
what was it in Immortal Hulk? The big green door, the big green room? He goes into the big green room.
What actually is his power set? He just can manipulate atoms?
Everything.
Yeah, no, yeah.
He's got all the powers.
Originally based on the Charlton character of Captain Atom, which, again, in the real DC is heavily nerfed. The character that is the most similar to Dr. Manhattan in comic books is Solar Man of the Atom. Pretty much the same character.
And with similar psychosis issues and all this other stuff. Also, in this issue, you notice that Dr. Manhattan, when he comes back completely naked. And they put him in this superhero costume, and as the issue goes on, and time goes on, he wears less and less of that outfit till when he's on Mars, he's naked again. That's commentary on like returning to infancy or Adam and Eve, and the question of sin.
I was thinking more just stripping things down to their basic.
Yeah.
As he loses his humanity, like everything gets stripped down to. Just sitting alone with his dong on Mars.
Well, the one question I wanted to bring up as we start our conversation about issue 4 is this is the first time that in reading this issue that I made a connection to another Alan Moore book that we read on the last comic shop, and that is the anatomy lesson from Saga of the Swamp Thing. In that particular issue, you find out that Alec Holland, who we thought for years was Swamp Thing, and that he was a real person and he was doused with chemicals and he jumped into the swamp and he came back out and he was the Swamp Thing, right? But in that issue, you find out that like the real Alec Holland died. Like he died in the swamp, and some sort of tuber like got his consciousness, and then because of the chemicals grew into a separate being that thought he was Alec Holland, but he wasn't. Like he was this tuber thing. And so for the first time ever in this particular book, I started to think to myself, is Alan Moore doing the same thing here? John is actually not John. Like he really did die in that particle accelerator or whatever the hell it was. And this thing that comes back, this Dr. Manhattan, is really just something completely different that thinks he's John. I don't know. What do you guys think of that? Like
the man who the whole reason for it was he had to fix the watch that got smashed by a fat man.
I'm just saying.
Which is the allusion to obviously the bomb. Yes, no, yeah. I see what you mean.
He died. Dead? Like he has different powers, and you could say he's different altogether. But I think he's just. I don't think it's the same guy. Like I think it's like some other new being that.
But how would he have the memory of the bar though? Without
him in there. To be created, no Dr. Manhattan would have been created.
Well, no,
right. He has all the parts, but he doesn't have the soul.
Right, and I think that's what I'm trying to say is like he obviously lost the humanity. Initially, in the previous segment when we were talking with Nicole, I thought that like Dr. Manhattan was always somewhat autistic or something, or he was more interested in facts and figures and didn't really relate to people. In this book, I just. Maybe it's a recording, like he picked up a recording, but it's not him anymore. It's like
that goes to the question of what makes us us. Yeah.
To me, it would be like the whole AI, right? Like if you were to take an essence of somebody, right, and like make a recording of them so that they could talk and you could see them or whatever, but they were generated by a computer. And then they died. Like that's not the same person. That person's in the ground. This is a recording, a simulation of what this person was, and that's what I thought. I think this Dr. Manhattan is a simulation, and that's why he's not human. Like, and he's trying to be, but he's not. Like, he's not. I don't know. Maybe I'm.
How in the world would you relate to somebody with ultimate power? Like, if you had ultimate power and you were talking to a plebeian, like, how would you even relate to that person? You know, the only person that he remotely relates to is Ozymandias, right? I mean, I pale in comparison to you, giving him his platitudes or whatever, even though he's the secret mastermind. A spoiler alert, but not, I don't know. Spoiler alert for like 40-year-old book.
He meets all these folks that are also quote unquote crime fighters, and they're just people running around in their pajamas. That's what he kind of says, except for Ozymandias, because he seemed interesting.
But then he also hits on a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
It trades up or trades down or trades.
Well,
But what's going on with that? I never understood that part.
I think Alan Moore is talking about the realities of being immortal. We even talked about it in other like Thor books that we talked about. Like if Thor's growing old, like obviously he's not going to want to hang out. I remember when you were young, like. Or in Highlander, like he eventually doesn't know
that's what I was going to say. Everything I know about immortality comes from Highlander, the greatest movie of all time. And in Highlander, he stayed with his Bonnie Heather until she died.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Manhattan's a dirty old man, and the moment that he saw some wrinkles and lines on this, he went to a younger model because he was just like
Not just a younger model, a lot younger model, like a statutory rape younger model.
Yeah.
Listen, at that point, he had already jettisoned sleeves, pants. He's basically just wandering around in a wrestling singlet. Like, this guy's not, he's not connected anymore.
No, he's not even him. He's a simulation.
And that's what I'm saying.
But,
going down. Plant my flag. He's a simulation.
The women are treated terribly in these 3 issues. Just horribly.
Yes, they are.
All of them. There's an abusive mother. There's a teenager having sex with an old man. There's a secretary that gets blown away.
Well, I think that's a good segue into issue 5, Fearful Symmetry, which does talk about an abusive mom because it is origin story of Rorschach. Has some action bits in it. This is where Ozymandias is attacked, and he totally killed that guy.
That's the first time you figured that out? He put the cyanide tablet in his mouth?
Oh, no, he did. Yeah. No, it's not the first time I figured it out, but I was like, it was very obvious. I was like, he killed
him on purpose. Oh, okay. No, that makes sense now.
It's all I even looked it up, all the Wikipedia, all the various things. Nobody says, the guy died from cyanide. I'm like, yeah, because he put it in his mouth.
That's right. The saddest thing is he had his secretary right there, and he let his secretary die. Like he got shot.
Bigger picture.
Omelets and eggs.
Omelets and eggs.
Shot in the chest. Like
Those are
point blank.
MTV dreams.
She was gonna die anyways because she's in New York when the big squid thing.
And listen, if she saw what happened to MTV, she wouldn't want to live anyway.
Yeah. So, and this issue is also not just the origin story of Rorschach, but it also has a motif that plays out through the entire thing. Chad, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's super fascinating once you see it. And it's not something I recognized through my first 2 or 3 readings. But this story is symmetrical in that the first page is the same layout as the last page. And the second page, second to last, and they're equal and opposites throughout the story until, they meet in the middle and Ozymandias socks them one.
Yeah. And not only that, but there's some other parts of this that are talking about like the symmetry of things and the reflection of things. This was the first time that I picked up that there's this interesting conversation between Dan and Lori in this diner. And a lot of the conversation is told by us looking in a mirror. Lori gets up to leave and Dan's going to ask her to come stay at his house, right? I see her and she's walking the other way, but like Dan's looking at us. Why is he looking at us if Lori's walking that way? And I'm like, oh no, she's not walking that way. She's walking towards us. We're just seeing a reflection in the glass. And for the first time ever, I was like, gosh, that is an interesting way of telling a story.
And that also reflects on its mirror image. So that's page 10. The mirror image is page 19, where she's at his house, and it all takes place in front of a mirror. She's sitting down in front of a mirror.
Yes. where he's just kind of looking at her and being
he's like,
if you need anything, I'm down the hall. And then he's like, son of a bitch, just want to get laid.
And this shows why y'all are the best in the business, because I did picked up on 0% of this.
No, it starts off, he sets the trap for Moloch, and then at the end, Moloch is the one who sets the trap for him, and instead of him trapping Moloch in the refrigerator, he gets tossed in the can.
Yeah, it all makes sense. But this is like one of the first issues where we get a ton of Black Freighter stuff, right? And
isn't it about Ozymandias?
Is it obvious?
It's not. It's there if you know what happens at the end of the book. I just knew that Ozymandias summons that large sea creature, and so I saw the shark that's huge, and then he kills it and eats it, and that kind of foreshadows what happens in the later books.
Yeah.
So that just knowing that, having that knowledge base. For me personally, of what happens in Watchmen, I picked up on it. But like if I was truly a rookie and just was reading this for the first time ever and didn't know anything about it, I would have never picked up on it.
But that's the beauty of this book, is it does reward those rereadings. And, there's so much you can pick up the first time. It's like, oh, that was great. And then you dig in the second time. It's like, wait a minute. He's floating around on a raft of dead guys that he was hanging out with. That's got to be something.
I think this issue has a lot of what we would now call sort of Easter eggs, all related to the tiger. I mean, actually, that's the William Blake poem that Fearful Symmetry is drawn from. So you have the number on the file of Blake's file is 801108. And there's a lot of this for a cover of a Grateful Dead album that's, I don't even know how to say this album. Oxomoxoa.
But yeah, no, there's a lot of. I'm just glad that the Ozymandias thing is becoming a little bit more clear to me. Like to Chad's point, he built a raft, and why did he build a raft in the Black Freighter story? Because he wanted to escape.
He wants to escape. He wants to get to his home to save his family. He's trying to save the people he loves.
And he's willing to sacrifice everything to do it.
Right. So he makes a raft out of dead people to float himself to what he thinks is, safety or...
But he should have known when you play with dead people, the vultures are going to come and swoop down at you.
And the sharks.
Yeah. And this is the first time ever that scene where he eats the gull and he's like, the blood was dripping from it was just...
Yeah, and then it goes straight from eating the gull to Dan Dreiberg eating the piece of chicken.
Yes. Yeah. So like a Rorschach painting, right? Is like the same image mirrored.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why you have so much, about Rorschach in this particular one. Again, I'm going to come to bat. I said it in the previous segment. He's pretty capable as a superhero. I'm just going to say it again. Like, he's capable.
For a 5'6", 140-pound guy, he kicks ass.
He does. Like, I mean, they came in there guns a-blazing. He had, like, an aerosol can, and he almost escapes. Like, he's like this close to getting out. Like, he has no business. He has to set the entire building on fire.
That hairspray can, of course, by the way, from Veet Industries.
Oh, snap.
But like Rorschach is Wolverine, right? I mean, with the stature and the demeanor, and isn't it Alan Moore commenting on like
Steve Ditko? He's Steve Ditko.
No, but I think what Ethan's saying is like it's a commentary on the darker, edgier characters.
Yeah, the vigilante type. Yeah.
Yes, which Wolverine was popular at the time for that kind of like, I don't take no guff.
But no, Rorschach is the everything's black and white, and I can't wait till we start talking about him with the psychiatrists.
Oh, well, let's go ahead.
That's great. That's a great segue into the issue 6, where Rorschach has been arrested. Most of the story revolves around his sessions with a psychiatrist doing Rorschach tests, where he tells the psychiatrist that he sees butterflies when in fact he sees dead dog faces.
Come on, Mr. Psychiatrist. Don't you think that's a little on the nose? You can't find some other test to use on Rorschach?
He wanted to be famous. He's like, I'll be on Time Magazine, the Rorschach test to Rorschach.
You're not going to out-Rorschach Rorschach.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you got to do, man. I mean, that's how you're going to get famous. I Rorschach.
The Raw Shark guys had a better chance getting through to Rorschach.
Oh man, but
I don't know why like his nihilism would have driven that psychiatrist that insane to, I guess, kill himself. Is that what I'm supposed to infer at the end of the book?
Does life matter? I mean, also you have to keep in mind that this is all in the shadow of the fact that Dr. Manhattan left, and everybody thinks that they're going to be dying in a couple days because
he lost his balance. He's no longer even keeled.
And then it fades to black, which means that I'm assuming that he offs himself.
Well, I think he shows up in a later issue. I think he's in issue 11. I think he's one of the people that dies in New York. He sees his wife. He's in that congregation of people that are meeting around the newsstand in that issue right before the creature comes and, half of New York is killed by Ozymandias' plot. Spoiler alert. But no, again, a lot of people make the thing about I'm not locked in here with you, you're locked in here with me. I think the most powerful moment in this particular book, the last conversation at that dinner party, they're asking about Rorschach to this guy. He's like, oh yeah, he was telling me about like this kidnapper, and this, the 6-year-old girl or whatever. And they're like, oh, did the kidnapper gag and tie her up or whatever? And then he's just like flat out tells him, butchered her and fed her to dogs. And like, and everybody gets up from the table because they're so horrified and disgusted. But like, that's the universe that Rorschach was living in. Like that scene from Full Metal Jacket where Vincent D'Onofrio says, I am in a world of shit. It's true. If you live in the abyss long enough, the abyss will swallow you whole. And that's what happened to Rorschach. That's the meta commentary too about comic books where, everybody expects it to be the Batman 66 TV show where there's an elaborate trap and, she's going to go down the conveyor belt to the giant buzzsaw and then the superhero is going to come in and rescue her on time. No, she was cut up and fed to the dogs. That's what we're bringing to the table here with Watchmen.
Literally brought to the table.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think, and these 3 issues, you start to really, the doomsday clock is ramping up. As we get closer to issue 12 and closer to Armageddon, you feel this drumbeat, impending doom drumbeat of, and I myself back to, this is mid 80s. We've got Reagan and Gorbachev and the U.S. and the Soviet Union. And there's a real fear of nuclear war that I think reading this today, we don't nearly have as much of. I mean, that we have fear of war, we have fear of terrorism and even horrible events like 9/11, but I think there's a less of a fear among our generation of
assured destruction.
Yes. Yeah.
For waking up one day and everybody's dead.
Yeah.
Like, not just like a couple people or one town or one city. Everybody just.
Yeah. Yeah. We just beat that with chess because Matthew Broderick showed us how to do it.
Yeah. And blue jeans and Yakov Smirnoff.
But is this a Gothic?
The whole story, is it Gothic?
Yeah, the Watchmen. Is it a Gothic? So just because I hit on this previously, I'm going to bring up this and I'm going to read it to you guys and you tell me what you think. Gothic fiction is characterized by an environment of fear, the threat of supernatural events, and the intrusion of the past upon the present. The setting typically involves physical reminders of the past, especially through ruined buildings which stand as proof of a previous thriving world which is decaying in the present. The depiction of horrible events in Gothic fiction often serve as a metaphoric expression of psychological or social conflicts.
Yeah, it's totally Gothic.
Good job, Ethan. Watchmen, Gothic horror. That's what and if you look at a lot of the rest of Alan Moore's work, pretty much a lot of it is Gothic horror. Saga of the Swamp Thing, From Hell.
Some of this equates to the fact that you look at Dave Gibbons and Alan Moore, they're both Englishmen. And Englishmen, especially of his generation, they experienced World War II very differently than how Americans experienced World War II, since their country was bombed.
Yeah.
They're in Europe, so they're on the front lines of the Cold War. You know, we had that Cuba Missile Crisis, and that was the closest for us and maybe the closest for the world. But they dealt with having the Soviet on their borders for generations. So I think that shouldn't be dismissed. There's a lot of psychosis that comes in just being not an American, being an Englishman, and how you deal with these giant political situations.
At the very beginning, it's, the looming threat of war. Everybody sees the train rolling down the tracks of absolute calamity.
It's important because we're talking about by far the most nihilistic issue of all of them. Like you're talking about, there's not a lot of light in this particular issue at all. I think it's important to note that the book starts with death. The comedian dies, and that's what kind of starts us on our journey. Honestly, as we'll get to in the next segment, I don't think it's until the issue where Dr. Manhattan takes Laurie to Mars that we finally get a little bit of hope that Dr. Manhattan says an exact combination of things that had to come about to create you, Laurie. That's a miracle. That's the closest thing I'll ever see to like a true miraculous thing in the universe. And so that's like that. That's the moment that you're like, oh, okay, maybe it's not so gloom and doom. Maybe it is like taking a step back and saying like our existence is at the very least miraculous, like all of our existences. So,
you know what else is miraculous? Is this issue made me dislike Carnage more.
Ooh. All right, because he looks like Carnage?
Yeah, just because it seems fair to say that Cletus Cassidy is modeled after Rorschach.
Mm-hmm.
And, he has those terrible evil stares when he's looking at the picture, and in his mind you get the image of that dead dog, and he's like a pretty butterfly. But it's so much more haunting than what they turned Cletus Cassidy into. They gave Cassidy all the tragedy and all of the psychosis, but none of the
nuance.
Yeah, none of the nuance.
They turned him into a comic book character, is what you're saying.
But not a happy Batman 66 one that has the traps and the buzzsaws.
No, a 90s era Batman. Yes.
It's the worst version of everything, and I hate it more now.
People like Rorschach nowadays for the completely wrong reasons.
I was going to say, but he did beat Quentin Tarantino to that whole, Superman's the real thing and Clark Kent is the disguise conversation by a good 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up this particular segment, Ethan, we're not going to obviously rate these 3 issues of Watchmen like we're not going to do that in any of the segments. But I did want to pose the question to you, since this was the first time that you read these particular issues. Which one of the 3 was your favorite?
Yeah, probably even if it was the most depressing, probably the 6th, the Rorschach story. I mean, usually these kind of anti-heroes appeal to me, so I thought Dr. Manhattan the issue was like, I don't know, not necessarily what are you getting me into, but like, this guy is the biggest like dick ever.
He's a wimp.
Yeah.
He's a wimp. He had his dad push him around. You shouldn't be a watchmaker. Then I need to go back and get this watch. I need to fix this watch. I'm a wimp. Yeah. I'm leaving my wife because she's getting old.
I don't know if I agree with that take, but I will say that's got to be like, if for your first time through, that has to be one of the toughest issues to, as far as accessibility goes. Like, when he's going through his Billy Pilgrim Unstuck in Time and experiencing all these moments simultaneously, it's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? What is this?
Yeah. It was very good use of like flashback and stuff, and flashback and telling time at the same time. Like you said, time is infinite for Dr. Manhattan, and I think they nailed that.
That's why it's my favorite issue too, because it has so much to do with physics and Einstein and that whole idea that, you know, when Einstein came up with the theory of relativity and the idea that time itself moves at you know, different periods, or time is not an absolute,
right? Like
we used to think it was. Gravity's
an absolute. Linear.
It's not linear. And having to wrap your head around that, because once you wrap your head around that, then you can create the atomic bomb. And that's why he said Einstein famously quoted, he wished he had been a watchmaker, because then maybe the bomb doesn't get invented.
Okay, that is not recommendation section, but there is a real life book out there. It's probably 20, 30 years old. It's called Einstein's Dreams, that I recommend for everybody. It's a bunch of different thought experiments about what if time worked this way. Like, what if time worked like when you throw a pebble in a pond and there's concentric circles and it goes quicker in certain parts, it goes slower in other parts. Like, who would travel to the quicker parts and who would travel to the outer parts of time?
Wow.
A bunch of different short stories. It is fascinating. And if you enjoy that kind of stuff, I mean, it's a real book. There are no pictures.
Which means Andy's out. Is it on Audible?
That I don't know. Yeah. It's Alan Lightman was the author.
All right. Well,
Ethan, who's up next?
Mikey's up next.
Mikey.
Yes. We got Mikey for issue 7, 8, and 9, and then we've got George from Shortbox Summary coming back to finish this out. But Ethan, thanks so much for coming on the Last Comic Shop with us. Man, it is so great to have somebody, a true veteran, who's been through the battles with us, sitting here with our 200th episode. I know you're going to be on next week. We're going to be doing Demon Slayer with you, but after that, what's the next book you want to read on the Last Comic Shop? What can we bring you back in 2025 for our 5th season to read?
I want to do some Hulk.
Nice.
Reading some Dr. Manhattan. I want to read some other, unstoppable force.
Oh, very good.
But so super kudos to all y'all for everything that you guys have been doing. This is, you guys do put out fantastic work week in and week out. Really do a great job with all the books. Have great chemistry. Absolutely no drama between any of you two, which is fantastic.
Couldn't say that about the last one.
And when you do listen, please smash that 5-star review.
Yes!
Come on, man. Give us some dap. Give us some love. Subscribe. Go to bcwsupplies.com. Put LCSPOD at checkout. Save yourself 10% on stuff you're going to buy anyways. And what other plugs do we got? Visit your local comic book shop.
There you go. Man, it is awesome having you on. You are one of the best pitchmen in the universe. Thanks so much to Ethan Larson. We'll be right back with more of the Last Comic Shop right after these commercial breaks with, again, issues 7, 8, and 9 and Mikey Wood. But until then, here are some well wishes from other folks that we love.
Hey, Last Comic Shop. Ryan here from the Autopod Decepticast. We wanted to give you a huge congratulations on 200 episodes. Also, I love those Golden Age Moments comic cover posts you do on Twitter. And if you, listener, like long-running podcasts and Transformers, head on over to the Autopod Decepticast. Once again, way to go on 200. You keep making them, and we'll keep listening to them. So long, and pistols at dawn.
Hey, this is Benjamin Morse, and I just wanted to drop in and congratulate the guys at Last Comic Shop on 200 episodes. Thanks for everything you guys do, and looking forward to the next 200.
200 episodes of the Last Comic Shop podcast. That is frickin' awesome.
Pow, pow, pow. This is Brad and Lisa Gullickson from the Comic Book Couples Counseling, and we laud you. We applaud you. 200 episodes. That is enough for some of those newbies who started with episode 1 to become old bees.
Yeah, but whether newbie or old bee, I'm sure your listeners are just happy that you're still doing it, because it takes a lot of effort and time and sacrifice and consideration to accomplish one episode, let alone 200 episodes. So our congratulations go out to Andy, Chad, J.A., and Mikey. Thank you so much for providing so many incredible hours of thoughtful and entertaining conversation. We really enjoyed your Wonder Woman episode recently. Also, your Wesley Dodds Sandman episode was freaking so fun.
So I think you deserve to go out and buy yourself some comics.
Yeah. Everyone should buy comics today. In celebration of the 200 episodes of the Last Comic Shop podcast, go out and buy some comics.
Way ahead of you, Brad. Here we go. Vroom, vroom. We're driving away.
Ooh, great soundboard.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Dave from the Beer in Front podcast. Huge congratulations to the Last Comic Shop podcast on 200 episodes. Well deserved. I'm going to record another one for like 250, 300, and 400 because you're a must listen. So congratulations again.
Oh, that was very, very nice. And we continue on with our in-depth coverage of Watchmen. On to talk about issues 7, 8, and 9. Mr. Mikey Wood.
Yay!
Yay!
Sorry. I didn't give you the proper introduction. The wonderful Mikey Wood.
Hell no. What's
Hey, I genuinely think that he has been on more episodes than any other of our guest hosts.
That's right. Got a body like Dan Dryberg. I've got hygiene like Rorschach. We've got a lower Manhattan like Dr. Manhattan.
Oh, good gravy.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious
all
though.
Blue.
For anybody that's out there that maybe this is the first episode of the Last Comic Shop you've ever listened to, well, first off, we don't usually go for this long of a period, but you should go back and you should listen to all the Mikey Wood episodes. Ethan has mentioned previously that I should make YouTube super lists where somebody could put it on before they go to bed. And I could do that with a Mikey Wood show. I could be eight to 10 episodes, 10 hours of Mikey Wood in a row.
You want people to sleep. You don't want nightmares.
You could have a Tom King one because we've reviewed so much Tom King.
You really
That's
have.
true. That's
really
true.
Have. We should try to get an interview with him at some point. So.
2025. Hope springs eternal here at the Last Comic Shop, so I'm always thinking ahead. So if Tom King's listening to this episode, feel free to stop by the Last Comic Shop at some point. But we're not talking about a Tom King book, as J.A. pointed out. We're talking about Watchmen, 7, 8, 9. I don't know if there's like a slow part in Watchmen at all. Mikey originally was kind of a little bit peeved that I didn't have him on for the previous segment because he really wanted to do that Fearful Symmetry, right? Like, that's one of your favorites.
That is one of my favorites, but I just like Watchmen as a whole. Actually, believe it or not, 7, 8, 9 are really, really, like, a lot of really wonderful stuff happens in 7, 8, and 9, so I'm perfectly fine. Like, the whole book it's just one of those books that I read when I was a kid. This book ran late a lot when it was being released, so I was riding my bike to, like, Passaic Book Center to pick them up, and then we moved, and it took me forever to find the last couple of issues. When the book was coming out, it was unlike anything I had ever read before, and issue 7 in particular deals with sexuality and things in a way that I wasn't. I was 13, 14 years old when this came out, and it just wasn't. And I was still reading G.I. Joe and Transformers and shit at the time, so I started reading Watchmen because the cover caught me, and this guy, these two upperclassmen that I really looked up to were reading it, so I jumped on board, and it was 86 for me is I think the most pivotal year of modern comics. Because 86 was Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen and Mouse and just so many things came out in 1986. And it was kind of the year that comics grew up, as they say, even though there were always sort of adult-oriented comics from the undergrounds in the 60s and everything. And yeah, so this book is important to me. I used to read it like every year, I would say, but I haven't in a long time. So this was fun, kind of revisiting these books, and it's always different. Every time I read it, I see more.
Okay.
So
all right,
yeah.
That is the year the Bronze Age ended, right? It was 86.
I think they say that. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. People are weird when it comes to these ages. I don't understand how there's not another age since 86.
There's got to be, yeah. The modern age seems to be stretching really long.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, as always on this show, we're going to start off with the 10-cent synopsis of what happens in issue 7, 8, and 9 for those folks that have not read Watchmen or just need a refresher on what happens in these issues. As Mikey pointed out, issue 7 does deal with impotency and sexuality and putting on costumes, feeling more comfortable in your own skin.
Yeah, I mean, we'll get to it. That whole issue is it's just everything is about sex, the visuals, everything.
What's the 10-cent synopsis of issue 7, Chad?
Okay, chapter 7 is where Night Owl gets his groove back. Silk Spectre and Night Owl are down in the Owl Cave or Boot Hollow, or I don't know what it was called.
The Boot Hollow.
I like that. That sounds like an amusement park ride.
Could say he's in the bowels of the building.
Oh, because owls. That took me a minute.
Yeah, I threw it out there.
I was piecing it together. Yeah. Anyway, so Silk Spectre dusts off some of the old equipment, so to speak, but unfortunately some of it doesn't work until Night Owl and Silk Spectre go out and fight crimes, or I don't know if it's necessarily a crime as much as they save folks from a burning building and do some superheroics. And then, what do you know? All that rust is gone, and everyone's able to do all the things they want to do. And
he just likes cosplay. What can you say? Everybody's got a kink. Don't kink shame him. Silk Spectre came out in that dress up to her like navel, and he's like, "Yeah, that works for me. Let's do it. Serve these people coffee, and then serve me pie a la mode."
There was a bit of a commentary on superheroine costumes and how utterly non-functional they were. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, she's sort of like dressed like a Rockette.
It's kind of like Red Sonja in armor.
No, Red Sonja, that is all tactical. That is well-placed chainmail. There's a reason for it. I will not have you debasing
all that
Sonja.
exposed skin, all those places you could stab. Make sure that's
just
right
so
over.
that she knows if she got cut or not.
I always thought that she's such a badass that she doesn't need any more armor than that. And that's what she shows up like that. People are like, well, that's awfully brave of her. And then she wipes them all out. So, but yeah, this issue is entirely sex. It's almost tongue-in-cheeky kind of little remarks. Like there's one point where they're like extending the ramp now kind of things. There's a lot of that kind of stuff. But it's also a bit of a commentary on impotence of comic book superhero fan. Like he kind of goes into that a little bit about how it's all like teenage revenge fantasies and things like that, and so just like the whole rest of the Watchmen, which is sort of like a murder mystery that's also a commentary on the superhero genre in itself. This one is like, it's not just the sex issue. It's mostly the sex issue, but it's a lot
of the sex issue. It
is.
People can't get their jollies unless they're out superhero.
Yeah, and it is funny how like those subtle things like the equipment won't work, and when he's trying to fumble with her clothes on the couch, the Ozymandias' show that's going on the TV, the commentary is sort of like a running commentary about what's going on the bed, and it's just really.
But really don't forget at the end, he jacks things off on the roof, and then everything's fine.
That's right. He does. And that's exactly it.
But you know what? There's a little bit of layered stuff going on here. Yeah. I do like the fact that Night Owl is vulnerable in this particular issue. Think of it as a little bit of emasculating in terms of the way that he talks about his difficulties with the lady, but I think that's refreshing. And I think that's to set the stage for what you would eventually get in a lot of where it's okay to, which I really liked, was how everything was going on around the world around him, like the World War III, and how that was making him feel very helpless. The problems were so big out there that he felt very, very small. And it wasn't until he saved some folks from a fire, just take one step at a time, and eventually you'll get to where you're going. So it was a refreshing point of view on male superheroes.
But Watchmen is about the Justice League. If Superman doesn't care about humanity, Batman can't get it up, and the villain wants to save the world. Like, everybody's very vulnerable, everybody's very troubled, there's no really pure characters, and a lot of people got the wrong message. A lot of people really love Rorschach, and they shouldn't. And these 3 issues are really good issues. I'm glad you guys made me read.
Chad, so you're often somebody that complains about the Zack Snyder version of Watchmen. This scene, I remember seeing this in the movie theater.
I know where you're going.
Well, no, what I'm trying to say was that scene came on with the Hallelujah and everything, and I just didn't know where to look to begin with. I felt very uncomfortable.
So, Mikey, earmuffs, buddy. Because I know you're a Snyder guy. Sometimes.
Well, no, I think his adaptation is good, but that part was really, really dumb. He took what could have been a really fun, cool moment and just made it so stupid. Like, the choice of music was stupid, the way it was shot was stupid. That was just so dumb.
It was very 90s softcore Skidamax.
It was really dumb.
But Watchmen was the movie that taught me that comic book accurate does not necessarily make for a great movie. You can see the imagery and you can feel the comic bookiness of it. He also tends to lean into things he thinks is awesome. Trust me, I'm a 90s comic fan. I'm all right with the leaning into the awesome sometimes. But the problem with the Watchmen movie was it's boring. And cinematography-wise, it was great. And like I said, as a comic fan, you could pick out those shots. But it also taught me that, not everything is for everything. Just because something is a masterful comic book doesn't mean if you take that and translate it, as faithfully as they did up until the ending, which I don't mind the Zack Snyder ending.
Makes more sense, actually. I like that. Yeah.
But as a movie, I don't think it worked. And then they came out with more. Here, you thought this 3-hour-long movie was boring? We'll have another hour. The animated pirate ship.
All right. Well, I just wanted to point that out. That was it was very. I thought it was very cringeworthy in the movie.
It really was. Yeah,
it was. I didn't know where to look. I was embarrassed to be.
Well, I mean, it's got an R rating for a reason. So
it does. Yeah. It does. Yeah. But I just was like, I don't know. Yeah. Well, let's move on to issue 8. We're going to get the 10-cent synopsis of that from J.A. Scott. So, J.A., what happens in issue 8?
Night Owl and Silk Spectre 2 pull a jailbreak and get Rorschach out of jail, though he doesn't actually need to be saved because he ends up just killing everybody who's trying to kill him in jail. He's not locked in with them. They're locked in with him. And then you have probably sort of the saddest moment, or one of the saddest moments in the book, where the original Night Owl, who's an old man, pensioner, just trying to get by, is killed because he's misidentified by some ruffians in the street.
Right.
I think they're making an argument about, what is the real cost of being a superhero as opposed to sort of comic books.
I got 2 things from this particular issue because it's probably one of my favorites of all of the 12 issues of Watchmen. I really, really do love issue 8 so very much. I'm not one of these people that gets the wrong thing from Rorschach, but I do like this issue in terms of
He says as he gets the wrong thing from Rorschach.
I'm sorry. I like the ingenuity that Rorschach has in dealing with these people that are trying to come up to his jail cell one by one and figuring out how you got to give him credit. in his little one-liners as they're coming up, the big man or Mr. Big or whatever, the big guy, the big dude, whatever his name is. And so I do like that part, especially the acetylene torch and he kicks the toilet. I always thought that's brilliant, actually. But I will say that the Night Owl thing, to your point, J.A., is probably one of the saddest points in this entire book. Because I think if you read all the back matter and you're trying to get all that stuff right, Night Owl is genuinely the one that's like the most like a superhero or what we expect from a superhero. Like, he was a genuinely nice guy. He believed in law and order. He believed in justice and all that stuff that you're supposed to. And at the end of the day, he's waiting for these kids to come, trick or treat at his house. And he gets beat with the award that the city gave him. It is really a true tragedy among all of these issues. And it's why in the next, 2 issues from now, in issue 10, I really do feel that Night Owl 2's reaction to the news of that is completely justified. Like that, like when he goes crazy in the bar and even Rorschach has to pull him off, of these guys, like, that's equally as powerful.
Yeah, it's not my favorite of the issues, but the like you hear stories about, and you see a little bit of it in some flashbacks earlier on, but Rorschach at one point used to be relatively normal, and he was like a question basically, and he's relatively normal until the child murderer thing broke him. So he's kind of what happens if you stay out there too long kind of thing. He's based on the question, but he kind of becomes more like Mr. A by the end of it, if you want to use Steve Ditko. These are all, I mean, I'm sure you talked about this earlier, but they're all based on Charlton Heroes because they had purchased the Charlton Heroes and Alan Moore wrote the story and they were like, well, this might not be the way we want to introduce these characters that we just bought. So he changed them all the pastiches of these Charlton Heroes. But it's understandable why some people would latch onto him. But in this book, it's, he does some badass stuff in this issue, and he breaks himself out of prison. He's almost as surprised to see them as they are to see him when they actually show up, which I think is pretty funny. But,
yeah, it's like, hang on, I have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
Like, they're there for the big prison break, and he's like, yeah, I'm already out. But no, you can see it. I keep honing in on the panel where the big guy is reaching in to get him, and he's like, what the hell do you got? And he's like, your hands, my perspective. Yeah. And you can see how lost he is in his philosophy. He has that glare, like he's just dead inside.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a human experience anymore. It is all black and white. And, he's doing these incredibly violent things and watching as other people do incredibly violent things. Like, once he gets that one guy and gets his hand stuck in, he's like, what's going to happen now? And the bad guy's buddies are the ones that ultimately kill him because he's in their way. The cruel depravity of just, this is what he is now. Like, he is broken, but also badass.
Yeah. Yeah.
I also like in this issue how Silk Spectre doesn't. You get it right away that like Silk Spectre does not like Rorschach. She does not like Rorschach whatsoever. She doesn't understand why Dan's trying to save him. And it's honestly, again, it's back to just like the original Night Owl is a genuine superhero. I really do feel like if there's a genuine superhero among the new Watchmen, it's Night Owl 2. Kind of comes from unlike a lot of these trees that bore wicked fruit, he came from a good tree. The fact that he continues to look at Rorschach and say, like, there's something there that can be saved, I don't know. It's not in this issue, but it's one of my other favorite lines where after when he basically breaks down and he yells at Rorschach about how hard it is to be his friend, and Rorschach turns around and he says, I'm really sorry. You're a good friend, Dan. And, I'm not, and for that, like, their friendship, it does hit me. It does mean something to me. And it is something that's very important. Night Owl's never going to leave him, even though he's just a sick, twisted bastard now.
Just like the original Night Owl, sort of an example of like the purest out of all of them.
All right. Before we move on, my English teacher brain was fiddling around with something Mikey was talking about. And the scene where Hollis Mason gets murdered with his own trophy. You see his reflection in the trophy, and you see his eyes where the arms are, what's that called, astride or whatever. Like his eyes are the spaces in between the arms, and so I was like, wait a minute, does this happen in each issue? Because I was thinking about spoiler alert, in the next issue, Dr. Manhattan looks inside a snow globe and sees his reflection there. And then I was like, oh, let's go back to issue 7. And it's Night Owl's goggles. And keep seeing the reflection of Night Owl and Silk Spectre. And so
there's a lot
all
of
these
that.
different reflections.
And if you've ever read, like, the Absolute edition has some of Alan Moore's script, he will describe one panel for pages because everything is very, very specific and everything is very important. A couple of issues ago, there was the Fearful Symmetry issue, which is laid out the same from the front to the back and back to the front. I'm sure there's so many subtle little things that people who are really, really into it and maybe listening to the show are like, oh, talk about this, that we're not talking about, because there's so much depth to this book.
The entire series of Watchmen is all about your reflection and how people, see you versus how you see yourself. Night Owl's a perfect example of that, in that he obviously sees himself as a hero. He wants to be something more than what he is. He feels more comfortable when he is something more than he is. And at the end of the issue, where him and Rorschach, hop into Archimedes and run off, leaving all of the rest of his life behind, he just, I don't know what's going to happen next. I don't care, because now I'm Night Owl again, and I have purpose, and I have something to do and a problem to solve. I think that's important in terms of that alter ego versus who they are when they put on the costume. You hear about that all the time, that really Bruce Wayne is actually a Batman. Batman is who he really is, and Bruce Wayne is somebody he plays. And I think that there's some of that here. It makes me think, what would have happened, honestly, if in this universe they hadn't outlawed superheroes and Night Owl had continued to team with Rorschach? Would have Rorschach gone down such a dark path that he did? Because the moment that, like, Rorschach goes back with Night Owl, slowly but surely you see Rorschach have a friend, somebody to bounce things off of, somebody to balance him out, a conscience again. He does become a little less homicidal, crazy pants. I mean, at least that's what I think. Yeah.
By the end of the book, you see that he actually gives a shit about stuff, and he's by the end of it, by the last chapter, he's finds out the conspiracy, finds out what Ozymandias has been doing. I don't know if we're going that far ahead, and he's in tears, like he's devastated by the whole thing. He's like, I can't believe you did all of this, and he just gives up by that point, because there's no, and that's when he seems to crack.
It's too gray for his mind to handle. He's too black and white. And I think, that's the sort of the whole argument about great men doing great things and comic books sort of trying to be a bit too one note.
Yeah. All right, well, then let's move on to the final chapter that we're doing with Mikey Wood today. Great talking with Mikey. And again, let's give the honors of the last 10-cent synopsis of issue 9, which is, oh my gosh, the issue on Mars.
Both of my favorite issues of Watchmen, and it's Watchmen, not the Watchmen, BT dubs. There is no Watchmen. They never call themselves the Watchmen, which is why their entry into the DC Comics Universe Handbook thing bothers me so much, because they're never the Watchmen. They're the Crime Busters, or they're the Minutemen. There is no Watchmen. But anyway, issue 9 is called The Darkness of Mere Being. It is probably tied with issue 4, which is Watchmaker, for my favorite issues. And they're both Dr. Manhattan issues. In issue 9, Dr. Manhattan, the most powerful being known to humanity, the Superman, essentially, who has given up on humanity for rightful reasons, finds a reason to care about humanity again. And he finds that via Laurie Jaspecic, the Silk Spectre, and her fragility, and her coming to terms with dark thing that she's not pleased about in the course of this conversation. And it is just a 30-something page conversation between he and her about existence, and then by the end of it about tachyons and about all these other wonderful things.
But the whole idea that he knows the end of the conversation at the beginning, but they still have to have the conversation because he doesn't experience time in a linear fashion. He experiences it all at once. And there's a big play on nostalgia, not just the perfume of Ozymandias, but the whole idea of, and danger of nostalgia and trying to remember how things were, quote unquote, back in the day, and things were better, but they weren't actually better, and looking back with a real gaze as opposed to, rose tinted goggles.
It's funny that they use nostalgia as the name of a perfume, because you use perfume to cover up your stink. And nostalgia does that. And throughout the storyline of this particular issue, you learn that nostalgia has a dangerous way of making, like you said, making ugly things seem beautiful or less ugly. And as that breaks down, as those rose-colored glass, essentially, like they even show that, shatters, the reality of it comes out, and it's a really deep issue.
I really like it for the fact that you see how disconnected a real superhero would be, because he has none of the same concerns as a human. He doesn't even think to give Laurie air to breathe when he takes her to Mars. He just shows up and she starts to die because he hasn't thought, oh, maybe I need to create some bubble for her to breathe. Previous to that, you sort of see Dr. Manhattan as the sort of the Superman pastiche where he's doing the right thing. He's not unlike the Frank Miller Superman from The Dark Knight Returns, where he's, very Reagan, right-wing patriot. And then he becomes, it was like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to leave, because it's not so much that he's brought back to humanity and he's left because he's given up on humanity. I think it's more that he just doesn't relate to them anymore.
Yeah, it's like he was taken apart atom by atom by atom, and they put him back together again, but something is missing from him. And he does a lot of things throughout the course of the book that he thinks humans would like when there's multiple hymns being intimate with Sally, and he's like, I thought you would like that. Laurie. I keep saying Sally. That's her mom. But
maybe he was being intimate with Sally too. That just happened on the panel.
You never know. But
time all happens at once.
So, and that's issue 4 talks a lot about that, about how he identifies more with machines than he does with people. But he doesn't know how humans think. He doesn't know how they behave. So he's doing a lot of things that he thinks he should be doing. In a roundabout way, admits that in this issue. He kind of is like, I had forgotten what made you so precious.
It ends on that note about life being rarer than a quark and unpredictable, and you have just that slightest glimmer of hope.
Well, the one thing that I wanted, and again, spoilers for anybody that hasn't read Watchmen, I hope that you have, because, again, in this particular issue, you find out really who Laurie's dad is, and that is the comedian. The whole drama around that is, again, that her mom would ultimately end up having a child with this man who previously attempted to rape her. From my perspective, though, it kind of makes sense a little bit in that if you look at comic books overall and you look at the superhero culture, right? Superheroes hang out with superheroes. Who else are they supposed to hang out with? And you see this throughout the entire series where Sally is Silk Spectre and she keeps up with most of the folks that used to be on the Minutemen. Like, Hollis calls her and she's kind of a little bit flirting with him on the phone. It's because these people, she can only really relate to this small community of people that have done this and were a part of this thing. And a lot of them aren't around anymore. And so for me, it kind of sort of makes sense why eventually, she would continue to cross paths with the comedian. And again, because the pool is so small, you keep bumping into the same person over and over and over again, sooner or later, you're going to bump into them at a time when, maybe the time is right, and then things happen. And it's almost the only time when you really see the comedian show any sort of empathy or be a real person as well, is those conversations that he has with Laurie, with his own daughter. Like he genuinely wants to have a relationship with her.
Well, it also exposes Laurie's relationship with her mom, which is not healthy.
Yeah, which is a broken relationship, which lends itself then to the broken relationship with Dr. Manhattan, which, by the way, that one broken relationship was the only tether he had to reality. And boy, people suck sometimes, and it's all going to crap. But we're alive, and that's a miracle.
Well, what's so interesting about Watchmen too is that even in this issue, the most important character to the story is dead before you open the front cover. The comedian is the key of this entire story. His death sets all of this stuff in motion, and he's the one thing that sort of tethers everything together through the whole story. And then in this one, you find out his connection is even more.
Well, back to that thought, though, about the relationship between Silk Spectre 1 and the comedian. It made me start thinking about, honestly, the rest of comic books. This particular book in Watchmen is a microcosm of so many relationships in comic books, where, like, you're hard-pressed to really think of a lot of really good, healthy relationships between folks in comic. Think of Hawkeye, right? Think of how many people in Hawkeye's with Mockingbird, Hawkeye's with Spider-Woman, Hawkeye's with this person, Hawkeye's, and they break up, and because, again, the serialized nature of comic books, you have to break these people up every so often. They have to get divorced. They have to move on to other partners, and it's like everybody has been with somebody or another over the last, 50, 60 years of comics, and this is kind of like a microcosm of that, in which, again,
they all went to the same high school, essentially.
Yeah. And they're all wearing skin-tight spandex, running around like, all right, fine.
Yeah, they all have this commonality. They've all, they sit around and they laugh about how Rorschach dropped somebody down an elevator shaft. And they sit around and they, because that's what they have,
Well, the last thing I want to end with on this particular issue is just talking about Dr. Manhattan and time. Because it's one thing that I still have yet to really wrap my head around. I know that there's a lot of talk about the tachyons and everything happening at once, and like the predeterminism of like you still have to go through the motions. Like you may know what the script is, but everybody's still got to read their lines. What did you guys think of that? Let's start with J.A. He's the science.
I needed the scene where they take the paper and fold it in half and poke a hole through it to show you how time is relative and no. To me, it makes sense. Somebody that powerful is going to be able to break space-time, and it's just a reflection of, I don't know if I go into predetermined, but he experiences everything at once, but you still have to experience it. You're playing on the idea that, you get a comic book every month and you kind of know that it's going to come and the basics of what's going to happen. The superhero is going to win. The bad guy is going to lose at some point. The bad guy's not going to die. He's going to go to jail, but he's going to break out of jail because you need to be able to fight him again. And what's going to happen, but you still have to read the story to find out how
to get to that point.
And it also, we are reading it as a linear thing.
Mm.
We need to be able to read the story from the beginning to the end. We're not unlike Mikey, who came in on issue 7. We had to read it from issue 1 to issue 12. So we are experiencing time the way that normal people experience time, not the way Dr. Manhattan experiences time. And they also play with that. They're playing with our perception of time as the reader.
Yeah, and it's a comic book. So if you want to pick it up on issue 7, sometimes you do.
Mm-hmm.
And you fill in from there, right? I always thought of it more of like the Slaughterhouse 5, Billy Pilgrim's become unstuck in time after dealing with whatever traumatic experience. Like this is Dr. Manhattan's disconnection from reality and disconnection from humanity. Somebody who has this much power, this is where he just stops pretending that time has to take place in that linear manner. He's on to the next level. That's how detached everything is.
That's why issue 4 is so cool, because it actually lets you in a little bit about how time is for him, because he's like 20 years ago I am, or 3 days from now I will be, and he's speaking to us all in present tense, but speaking to things in the future and speaking to things in the past as if they've already happened. Very cool.
The one question I had then coming off of that is, you have that whole old adage where, absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? In this particular book, would you say that Dr. Manhattan is corrupt absolutely?
I think they play with that. Is like he's beyond that because he is no longer human. And so you can't apply human morals to him.
I mean, from a human perspective, yes, he's broken. Yes, he's corrupted. But he's not on that plane anymore. He's not pretending to be on that plane anymore. He's elsewhere. He's gonna go
to me, that's the corruption, though, is he chose. As sooner or later, he chose. At the end, he kind of was reminded, like, that maybe he made a choice and that he didn't have to make that choice. He could have realized that life was precious, and that's what he decides to go back and save things. But he, up until that point, he had made a choice that, like,
but Lori Dan, he doesn't have anything left. It's like Thor in the Avengers Twilight, where people get real old and it's sad, so he just goes away.
Any case, that's all the time we had. Thank you so much to Mikey Wood for stopping by our last comic shop for our 200th episode. Mikey, we hope that you're going to be on more and more episodes in future. In fact, I can guarantee it. I can guarantee you listen to the rest of 2024. Somehow I've looked ahead. And although we have to have these shows play out, I know what's coming. So
Andrew is our Dr. Manhattan. He's the one who walks around without clothing on.
Yeah, that's why it's not a video podcast, because he's just naked. Like too much. Too much.
In any case, Mikey, thanks again for being such a pal.
Well,
the last comic shop.
Yeah, I mean, maybe at some point we could talk about how Dr. Manhattan, after all this goes down, decides to create the new 52 universe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
which I don't actually hate. I don't hate it. I don't hate it.
Nah, that's a whole other episode where we can talk about that. We'll be right back with more of the last comic shop right after these commercial breaks and these well wishes from some wonderful folks that sent it to us. We'll be back with George from Shortbox Summary to finish off 10, 11, and 12. Stay tuned.
Hey, comic book fans, it's Chris Bailey, a.k.a. Charlton Hero on Twitter. Just wishing the fine folks over at the Last Comic Shop podcast a big note of congratulations on reaching episode 200. Amazing accomplishment. One thing I will say, I've been new to the podcast recently, and I am a fan. One of the highest recommendations possible. The hosts are engaged. They talk about the comic books that we want to hear about, new and old, and also the recommendations actually got me to try out some new stuff that I would never have given a chance before. Do yourself a favor. If you haven't listened to this podcast, or this is your first episode, make sure you jump into those archives. You got 200 episodes. Congratulations, guys. This is a milestone. I've got nothing but great to say.
This is Madison Standish of Madison on the Air, the comedy audio drama podcast where I get zapped back into old-timey radio shows like The Green Hornet, Philip Marlowe, The Shadow, and Forbidden Planet. Whenever I'm in town, I always listen to the Last Comic Shop podcast. I feel like a 1970s band on tour making the rounds to the local radio stations, but I'm woefully sober for the occasion. Happy 200th episode! The Last Comic Shop podcast rocks!
Hey guys, this is Justin from the Iron Age of Comics podcast. Just real quick wanted to say congratulations on hitting 200 episodes. Talking about comics on the internet can get real heated real quick. But the Last Comic Shop podcast is, I think, a consistent source of fun and positivity about these comics that we all love so much, you know? So thanks for letting me say so. Keep it up.
Hey everyone, Kirk here from Strange by Nature podcast. Just wanted to drop by to say congratulations, you guys, on hitting 200 episodes. Great milestone. Looking forward to many more years of many more shows.
Hey, this is Chris at Play Comics, and I just want to congratulate all of you for 200 episodes. That is a very big, very round number, both of which are very important things. You know, just like comics, round numbers sell things. 200, that's a milestone. Like, you've done it. I think you might be able to say that you know what you're doing by now. And being completely serious, though, like, just the welcoming way and the zany way that y'all are presenting everything here, it's a nice feeling knowing that there are still people out there that are taking these comics exactly as seriously as they need to be taken. Which is, you know, silly because comics are big and silly, and that's That's just how it works. And you've managed to remember that for 200 episodes. So yes, that is a big deal. Celebrate it with whatever beverage you choose. But I have to know, what are some of your favorite comic book video games? And how do I sucker more of you into coming on my show to talk about them?
All right, we're back with more of the Last Comic Shop with our 200th episode extravaganza. That's right. Double size, triple size, all these folks coming back. Thank you so much to everybody that has wished us well on our 200th episode. But it is time to start wrapping this shit up. That's right. Flick the lights on. It's last call as we get into Watchmen issues 10 through 12. That's right. The finale is right around the corner. Whether you're reading the Black Freighter and don't understand what the hell's going on, or, Ozymandias is deciding not to put a Rorschach toy with the rest of his figures because these are my marketing notes about the toy figures. Don't include these people. And we are joined by our final guest host of this episode, and that is George from Shortbox Summary. Yes, our good friend. So before we get started, just general thoughts on Watchmen overall, George. I mean, we asked everybody else what their general thoughts were. What are your general thoughts on this magnum opus of comics?
I think it's complicated. It's kind of the way I describe the Beatles, where like I don't necessarily like the Beatles, but every single one of my favorite bands, their favorite band is the Beatles. And so I wasn't alive when Watchmen was coming out. I've only ever existed in a post-Watchmen comics community where creators have been inspired by this book and have it reflected in their work. And so I think a lot of the books, circa 2002, 2003, 2004, 5, like when I was like really getting into comics, the touch of Watchmen is undeniable in those books. Like I think the Ultimates is like such a clear modern interpretation of Watchmen. And so it's not my favorite book, but I have to respect it. It's like the Citizen Kane, where it's like, yeah, man, I'm never going to sit down and just like watch Citizen Kane because I'm like, damn it, I want to watch Citizen Kane today. But like every couple years, I'm like, is it really that good? And then I'll go back and watch Citizen Kane, or I'll sit down and read Watchmen. I'm like, yeah, man, it really is that good. It's incredibly dense. Alan Moore makes me feel so dumb every time I read one of his books. Like him and Grant Morrison, the two of them make me feel so stupid that like I have to remember what it was like being in high school and college and like finding out like how to research a topic I don't understand to convince a teacher that I do in fact understand it. And so every time I like sit down to like tackle these books, and this one was especially tough because I didn't have time to read the entire series, so I did just jump in at issues 10, 11, 12. Man, the amount of like academic research I did just to like make sure I was like catching up with every contextual clue, every reference. This book is amazing, but again, like I never just like, oh, it's a Friday night, I should sit down and read Watchmen. No, I'm like, it's the end of the year, I must put my life into perspective. Like it's such like a big, hearty endeavor to take this book on. One, thank you for having me on to bat cleanup for this episode. Two, I can't think of a better book for episode 200.
Yeah. I will be hard pressed to find something for 400.
Promethea, baby, like keep the Alan Moore train going on books we think we understand. Like it'll be fine.
We'll see. But one thing that you do a lot of research for, and one of the main reasons I wanted to bring you on as a guest, is you do an awesome job of putting comic books in their proper place contextually. So George, you've lined up some movies, maybe some music, maybe a TV show, maybe comics, who knows? So I think you did Watchmen number 12 here, George. So when was that released, and what was going on around that time?
Okay, so I couldn't find the actual release date. I like to use a website called Comic-Con. This is run by, I think John Jackson Miller is like the big head behind it. Probably best known for their work on Star Wars books at this point and a lot of Star Trek books as well. But they list everything out by year and by month. However, this book came out in 87. The listed date on DC Infinite was October 7th, 1987. So the top 10 books. Uncanny X-Men 217, Uncanny X-Men 218, Punisher 1, Uncanny X-Men 220, Uncanny X-Men 221, Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21, and then Uncanny X-Men 223, 224, 225, 226, 227, 228. That is what Comic-Con has. I trust these people, but the fact that there's not a single DC book, and like I tried to scan through the rest of their available records, which are admittedly incredibly slim, because like this is all data taken from Diamond at this point.
Okay.
And like I don't know how these books were selling this few issues. Like the estimated issue units sold for Uncanny X-Men 217, the number one selling book, but like none of them go more than like 82,000 units, which just seems like such low numbers because they were selling books in more places. And so I don't know if there was actually like the direct to market and then the direct like retail, like the ones with the barcodes and the one with like the Spider-Man logo, like the.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't know how they would keep track of the ones with the barcodes that were being sold in grocery stores and things like that. That's tough. Like you could get like pre-order sales from like comic shops, but like I don't know how you would keep track of like, yeah, I don't know. This is how many Kroger sell. You wouldn't know.
Uncanny X-Men 217. That's like the really sick cover where it's like Juggernaut and Dazzler or exploding
coming
stuff.
off of the Mutant Massacre.
Yeah. So that was like the first appearance of Apocalypse, right?
Well, that was X Factor 6.
Yeah, we're in that awesome period close to one of my favorite issues with like that sick Wolverine Sabretooth cover.
And Amazing Spider-Man Annual 21, that was the marriage of Peter and Mary Jane.
Yeah. These are my jam. I'm glad we're talking about these because these are some of my favorites.
Some of the first variant covers on that one, because you had the Peter and Mary Jane cover and the Spider-Man and Mary Jane cover.
Oh yeah.
All right, so what was going on with movies around the same time?
What a time to be at the movies, Andy. I am so glad you asked. So I went again. The date on the book is when you're supposed to pull it. This is the date that's listed on DC Infinite. So I'm going by that date. So number one at the box office, Fatal Attraction.
Oh, look out for the bunny.
That poor rabbit. Yeah, it should have been a squirrel if you know what I mean. But that poor rabbit. Number two, Like Father, Like Son.
Okay, I think I know what movie that is. That's not like a Freaky Friday movie where they swap places. Or
It's Sean Astin and Dudley Moore, and they definitely switch bodies after they have a formula.
Hey!
That's absolutely what happened.
I watched that when I was a kid because my dad loved those kind of movies with like the goofy, like, I don't know, he loved like the absent-minded professor and this and that, and like computer wore tennis shoes, and he's like, oh look, they're gonna swap places, and I'm like, all right, they're gonna swap places, let's watch it, Dad.
Catherine Hicks was in that from Seventh Heaven, but I know her as the whale doctor in Star Trek 4.
Underrated Star Trek movie, gotta be honest, yeah. Number three, The Princess Bride.
Oh, is there any better movie? I mean, there are, but like that's surely among the top 25. Love, true love
is what brings us together here today. What are we doing? Bringing that into our real lives. Number four, one of my personal favorite movies, Dirty Dancing. I fucking love Dirty Dancing so much. Yes.
Oh, and Jennifer Grey is so smoking hot in that.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, she's dancing.
Pre nose job, Jennifer Grey.
Yeah.
I don't care. She's just smoking. I don't even care, man. She carried a watermelon. It is over for me.
She carried a watermelon. It's over.
That's all it took.
That's all it took.
Some summer fruit and Andy's out.
Well, it's cool because it was like the reintroduction, I guess, of Patrick Swayze and Jennifer Grey, because they worked together on Red Dawn a couple years earlier.
Oh.
And man, I think there's like a Movies That Made Us episode on Netflix about Dirty Dancing, and Patrick Swayze is such an asshole when he's talking to Jennifer Grey, like during like test shots and like when they're like doing rehearsals for dancing.
Yeah, apparently they didn't get along at all,
which is weird because there's irrefutable chemistry between the two of them in Dirty Dancing. And number five, starring Jim Belushi and Louis Gossett Jr., The Principal, about a drug-infested high school that Jim Belushi becomes the principal of. and then he teams up with security guard Louis Gossett Jr. to clean up the school.
Oh, yes. You know what? I don't think I ever saw that movie, but I remember walking past the VHS tape at the video store and being like, the principal. And I was just like, well, that looks intense.
Hardcore. Well, there's that. There's also that Tom Berenger movie, right? Like The Substitute.
Yeah.
Yes. Like fundamentally the same movie, as this.
There were a lot of those movies in the late 80s, early 90s, sort of teacher goes in and cleans up rough school, right? You had Dangerous Minds. No, and there was a one with
Edward Olmos.
Yes, it's not Stand By Me.
Stand and Deliver.
Stand and Deliver, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. Music,
right.
though. I got the Billboard Hot 100 for October 10th, 1987.
Wow. Now hit us with some sick jams.
Oh, I sure will. Number 1, Here I Go Again by Whitesnake.
Yeah. Yes. Had that on album and cassette.
What a time for hair metal. 2, Lost in Emotion by Lisa and Cult Jam. I host Pub Trivia. I do a music round every week. I'm really proud of my music round for hitting such like an even spread of genres, of decades, of time periods, of vibes. I have literally never heard this song before 3 hours ago when I was doing the research for this, and I had to like look it up on YouTube, and I was like, yeah, I guess this is the second best song of the month. Sure. Yeah, sure. Why not? Yeah.
The 80s was a weird time.
You know what's not weird, though? Number 3, Carrie by Europe. Again, hair metal making its sweet comeback. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I was a bigger fan of Cherokee by Europe. I really love that song. Song rips. And also, like, basically, like, if you guys have ever seen that movie Hot Rod, the entire soundtrack is basically just Europe. It's really good. Song number 4, I Heard a Rumor by Bananarama.
Not one of my favorite Bananarama songs, but I'll take it.
No, Cruel Summer is such a freaking vibe, man. That song is so good. Shockingly, number 5 and not number 1, You Got the Look by Prince.
Was that his best era? I think that was his best era. I mean
his best era was 89 with Batman, but yeah. No, you're right. I think you're cooking with gas here. Yeah.
All right. Well, we got to get to Watchmen.
We got to talk stories.
So yeah, we're going to talk about issues 10 through 12. So here comes the 10-cent synopsis from Mr. Chad Smith. So Chad, where are we at in the story as Watchmen seems to wrap up here?
Oh my goodness! All right, I'm glad we have George here because I was running out of gas a little bit. All right, chapter 10. This is titled "Two Riders Were Approaching."
A reference to the Bob Dylan song.
Basically, you get Night Owl and you get Rorschach, and they are doing their research and uncovering who the big bad of the story really is. But they are going around and hacking and figuring out his password. And boy, it was a real 1980s password. It took Night Owl 2 guesses.
That has one of my favorite scenes of all time. I mean, you heard it earlier. Like, Rorschach is my favorite character in this, not because like he's somebody that's admirable, but he does have he has the badass moments, right? He walks into this bar, crushes the glass in the guy's hand, and like holds it like. It's so badass. Like, what are you supposed to say about that?
Yeah, and he calls that lady a whore in front of her kids.
Well, I know. All right, there's those other moments, but that glass scene, that is good. I like that.
Now that we've all heard Andy say that he's based his entire life on Rorschach, what happens next? What happens next in the summary, Chad?
Okay, so chapter 11. This one is titled "Look on My Works, Ye Mighty." And Despair.
This one's a reference to a poem from the
Ozymandias. So yeah, in this one, Ozymandias shows up to his little atrium.
The vivarium, right?
The vivarium. There you go. And he freezes it out because he's a bad guy. Dun, 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 dun.
It's the Savage Land. Like, come on, what are we talking about?
There we go. And he makes his enemies kneel before him. You know, his enemies that used to be his friends. And then everybody's real mad and people are fighting in the streets, and then he reveals his big plan and then drops one of my favorite line in comic books. I did it 35 minutes ago.
Honestly, like, one of the greatest comic book moments of all time. Like for real, one of the greatest. Like, yeah, why don't the James Bond villains ever do that shit? You know, like it's like
Instead
it's
of
like
saying
an
what
awesome
they're gonna do.
It's Austin
Right.
Powers where he's like, Dad, I've got a gun in my room. I can go get it right now. We could shoot him and be done with it. He's like, no, I want to put up an intricate trap. You know, and it's
Because
like, why do you do that?
I understand Ozymandias's need to explain his scheme, right? Again, all supervillains or whatever, they want to gloat in how awesome they were and how intelligent they were. But yeah, you're right. Do that actually after it's already happened. And that's how you really gloat, when there's no hope that you're going to be foiled.
And speaking of that, chapter 12, A Stronger Loving World.
Which is from a Welsh musician, John Cale, song Sanities.
The Velvet Underground's John Cale, correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, I love me some John Cale and Lou Reed in the process. But anyway, the plan has happened. There's a big alien anus in New York after the Ozymandias has wiped out half of the population. And then everybody shows up to have a conversation with him. And he gets shot, but he catches the bullet in his hand. He tries to fricassee Dr. Manhattan. But then Dr. Manhattan comes back bigger and bluer. Still not wearing underpants. And but Ozymandias is happy he did it. He's changed the world because he made everybody have a common enemy. And so as long as everybody goes with the plan, even though this terrible thing has happened, you know, the world will be better for it. And then old Rorschach and his not being willing to deviate from what's right and what's wrong. So he gets fricasseed for that by Dr. Manhattan. And then, what's her name? Nightshade and Night Owl get new hairdos and witness protection program, and the story's over. The end.
Yay!
Except that Rorschach's journal is sent to this right-wing publisher.
New Frontiersman, yeah.
Yeah. And that's where it ends, with the journalist grabbing the journal. And so
from the crank pile,
Yeah. But you're talking about favorite lines in this. I mean, issue 12 has some of my favorite bangers, honestly. One of my favorite ones is when Ozymandias appeals to basically God, because he's standing in front of Dr. Manhattan. It all came out in the end. Nothing ever ends. Because it doesn't. Nothing ever ends. It's a comic book. Not only that, but it's life. You know, there's going to be the next day and the repercussions of what you did, and who knows whether you did the right thing or not. You just did what you did. There's that line. There's like, I thought you liked humans. He's like, yeah, maybe I'll go and make some. You know, just these kind of lines. But my favorite of all of the lines actually happens between Silk Spectre finds out about all these people dying in New York, and all she wants to do is she wants to be comforted by Night Owl, because we're not dead. The reason why I love that little section is because throughout this book there are little moments of humanity and true humanity, right? In issue 11, where you got the guy that runs the newspaper stand, he's like, oh, my wife died, and I just wanted to sell newspapers so I could be around people. And then he finds out that the kid next to him has the same name as him. And at the end, when everything's destroyed, they hug each other as everything is blowing up. I thought that was a human moment. There's a human moment here, too. Yeah, they want to have sex, but it's because they want to celebrate the fact that they're alive and that they did not die. And all they can think about is themselves in that moment. But that's real humanity, I think. That's a window into really how people would react in a state of tragedy sometimes. And so, boy, I love that little segment.
Yeah, so we have the end of the Black Freighter story, which I still don't quite understand that whole thing. It's Ozymandias' origin story, maybe?
He was a boat?
No.
I thought he was like emulating his hero, Alexander the Great. And so Alexander the Great wanted to go out and conquer the known world, and then he met people, and then he had like a change of heart, right? And it's like, instead of him taking over the world, he wanted to bring the world together. That was why he enacted this plan, right? I thought that was like why he shifted the plan. And that's why, like, can we talk about the movie a little bit?
Sure.
Just like, because the ending is like the biggest difference. So one, I think it's like kind of beautiful in the comic book that it's like all the artists and creatives of the world that were like being kidnapped, right? Like wasn't that the story in the earlier issues? Like they were all being like taken away somewhere, and like they were the ones who were feeding into like the giant monster that eventually alien extraterrestrial threat that kills 3 million people in New York, right? The way it was framed made me think like the undesirables from like the McCarthyism era, right? Like all the drunks, the poets, the writers, like everyone who was kind of like a thought maker, I guess, who like would have stood in the way of pure 100% democratic thought and kind of sounded like a commie sympathizer. It's like those are the people that were being rounded up in the book, and then they made the alien threat that was the thing that convinced the world to come together. And then in the movie, they completely shit all over that, and they make Dr. Manhattan be like the perceived threat. And like, I honestly think both work, and I think for a movie to not be 5 hours long, I get why they did what they did, but I think that really makes him leaving humanity so much more pointless, because it's like in the movie it's framed as like, oh, he's the existential threat that we must combine to work against, and then in the book he's like, no, I'm so disgusted about everything here that is just not living up to like what it could be, that like I don't even want to know you, and like that's why he leaves, as opposed to before where he feels like he have to. And so like that, I also kind of want to talk about Doomsday Clock as like a pseudo sequel.
Okay.
You guys like Doomsday Clock?
No.
I haven't finished it.
I will say on record that I do not like anything other than the 12 issues of Watchmen. I feel like everything, even before Watchmen and Doomsday Clock, and even the Watchmen series on HBO, which was fairly good, I feel like all of that is just kind of chasing something that should be. It was its own story. It was like, I don't understand why they had to keep on adding on to it and making it. No, like it cheapens it in some ways, and I don't think any of them are good.
I'll tell you why it had to exist though.
Why
yeah.
that?
Wasn't the last panel the same as the first panel of the first book, where it's like the button with like the blood on it, but like that guy's shirt at the New Frontiersman with the ketchup spilled on it?
Yeah.
So isn't like that's the ending, but it's also, that means it's like a new beginning, right? And like the cover itself, which has been counting down the entire time, by the time you get to 12, it's 12. Like it is midnight. Like it is the end of humanity. So like this is not just the end of the story. It's like, no, like, bitch, we're there. Like it's fucking over now. And it's like, to me, that makes sense. On top of the metaphorical commentary in Doomsday Clock, talking about how like, yeah, man, Watchmen kind of ruined everything for comics, because we've just been chasing Watchmen for the last 20 years, 40 years at this point, you know? Well,
and that's the thing. You make a great point that at the end of Watchmen, it does kind of end on a point where like people can take that story and they can run with it. I just wish that people would resist the urge to do that.
Yeah.
There are lots of other books or creative things in which the story ends and technically it could keep going and going and going and going, but at what point are you just dry humping that original awesome idea? To what I think Chad has said that about Star Wars so often. Like at some point something has to end and just be done with it.
Yeah, I don't know. This is the thing I have with the Watchmen. I understand that it's supposed to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's great, but I don't think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Maybe it's because I read it too late, and had I read it in the 80s when it first came out, I would have thought it was better, but it's just, it's good. It's not the best ever.
I think the problem nowadays with Watchmen, and this is just my opinion, I still read Watchmen when like not everybody and their brother knew about it, right? I remember the first time I read Watchmen actually was when I was roommates with Chad in college. I had not read it until I picked up his issue. So like the late 90s, sure, Watchmen had been around for 10 plus years, but it wasn't like, here's the movie, here's the TV show, here's all this other jazz.
The movie. I haven't seen it.
I never finished the TV show, although it was really good.
And I watched the TV show, but the TV show is not really related to the TV show is Watchmen adjacent. It's more about Tulsa than anything else.
Yeah.
Which I liked about it.
You know, but I just feel like I just
don't think it's that good of a story.
I'll fight with you on that. I think it's a perfectly good awesomeness.
The other way you can look at that, in the world of Watchmen, instead of superheroes, the kids have those pirate comics. And so you have that story about how someone's trying to do something good, but they end up being worse than anything else, which parallels Ozymandias, but also is what Watchmen did to comic books, where Watchmen was trying to do something good and deliver this awesome story. And what did it do? But in my opinion, it ruined comic books for a good long time with everybody trying to ape comic books. And then you bring up Doomsday Clock. Look at DC for the last decade. Who's been trying to ruin comics more than DC? I couldn't tell you.
Oh, I take umbrage with that. I am actually very happy with DC's current slate, to be completely honest. But I think that's a great point, where Infinite Crisis era, 2006, 2007, Superboy was the mouthpiece for the fanboy, where it's just like, no, you're not doing the story right. On his world, he's the only hero. Everyone else was like a comic book, and he's just like so upset with everyone failing to live up to his expectations. Like, he became the mouthpiece for comment boards, for forums, talking about how bad DC's fucking up. And so with Doomsday Clock, it's exactly what you're talking about, where it is like, no, we've been beholden and essentially just hamstrung by Dr. Manhattan has been behind the scenes all along, like pointing us into certain directions, changing our development, changing our trajectory to be more like what he thinks it should be. Like, I think that's like, honestly, shit on Doomsday Clock all you want. I don't care. I think it's a great book. Yeah. But like, I think that is such a smart idea, and honestly such a brave thing to say about one of the perennial bestsellers that DC has ever had, that Jeff Johns is VP of creative or whatever his title is at DC. Like, and so to just like kind of dump on the book like that, I think is so incredibly brave.
So for me, it's the Pearl Jam paradox. Spoken about this before. Pearl Jam, a fine band, right? I hate them. Hated them for years. And the reason being is what they've inspired and what has come about because of Pearl Jam and Nirvana and, the grungy bands at the time. Nirvana. It just brought in all these crappy grunge bands that didn't live up to the same level or talent of Nirvana and Pearl Jam. There was just a period in music where it got rid of all the awesome hair metal.
The bands. You don't blame the fans, so the people that loved all these bands and bought all the music. You blame the bands for starting it.
I blame Eddie Vedder, yes, because I have to. But yeah, they're the ones that put that into the zeitgeist and ruined music for me for a good bit. The same is true with Watchmen. Like, Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns are great, but 1986 they taught comics the wrong lesson. And it took a decade or two of learning the wrong lesson for a lot of characters, where they thought it was grim and gritty and they thought this was the way to go. And
it wasn't until 2015's Unbeatable Squirrel Girl volumes 1 and 2 that came out that we really
I'm telling you
that we started course correcting.
But it's the opposite message for sure.
No, I really get where you're coming from. I remember one time on Twitter seeing this artist, but they were like, man, the amount of pitches I get, I wish people were less inspired by The Dark Knight Returns and more inspired by All-Star Superman. Because those are the kinds of stories I want to tell. And so, like, why? Like, why do you want something to be dark and gritty and serious? And it's like, something being dark and gritty doesn't actually make it serious. Like, it doesn't make it sincere. It doesn't make it genuine. And so, like, just conflating the idea, like, that's why I hate New 52 so much as a concept, where it's like, no, we got to take this. Like, it felt like someone from the 90s idea of a cool comic that they did 20 years too late.
No, the execution on so many New 52 books fell short, but I like the idea where they were trying to mix things up, and like you had war comics and you had westerns
and then OMAC, all that's like,
there are lots of highlights.
That stuff was great, but them trying to re-image the 2010s, and it does feel like it stems back to Watchmen, with like the precedent that Watchmen set. And I mentioned it earlier, but like, I think the Ultimates does a much better job of this than a lot of other efforts do, especially the current Ultimates universe is absolutely bonkers and feels like a real world the way that Watchmen really feels like a real world too. Obviously it's a fake alternate history, but
I have a question to pose to everybody. Now we're wrapping up Watchmen here, and we've been starting to talk about dark and gritty, right? And everybody kind of equates Watchmen with being dark and gritty. I'm going to challenge everybody here. I honestly don't think that it's dark and gritty. I think it's serious. I think it's adult. I think it deals with things in a way that comic books up to that point had not been dealt with. But when I think of dark and gritty and killing for the sake of killing and blood splatter and this and that and vigilantism to the extreme, yes, Rorschach is a dark and gritty character in this. But as I mentioned earlier, there are some moments of genuine humanity and hope that are in this book that I think counterbalance some of the, scenes of the original Silk Spectre and Comedian. And so I want to challenge you, do you really genuinely feel like Watchmen is like what you would consider dark, or is it become that because it was so revolutionary for the time?
It gets lumped in with The Dark Knight Returns because they came out around the same time. Dark Knight Returns came out actually before. I think Dark Knight Returns is very dark and gritty. It is dark. You're killing all of Manhattan. That's a couple million people killed. So that's pretty dark. It doesn't have Nazis, but that's just because it's not a Frank Miller book.
No swastika nipple tattoos in this book, yeah.
But they wouldn't be out of place. No. The thing this book has, which Pearl Jam has, the Pearl Jam knockoffs don't, is nuance. And that's what makes Watchmen so great, beyond all of the Easter eggs, beyond all the metaphors, beyond all the things you can dig into and find different things each time you read it. It has that nuance. And just like I go back to the Marvel Age of Comics, Stan Lee brought in, real problems and gave his characters something a little different than what a lot of the DC universe had at the time, where the good guys were good guys and brush your teeth and go to bed on time. Spider-Man was worried about his aunt being able to pay his bills. In this book, I feel like this was the next level up of nuance, where nobody's all good, nobody's all bad. Even the biggest bads are in their own ways trying to do good things. They've just become misguided. They've been set off the path. And you don't get that everywhere else. But what people took out of it was Rorschach in jail saying, "I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me." And it might as well have been, Wolverine going snicked and look how cool he looks. And then we get Zack Snyder. It's that nuance where people were copying this that they didn't copy that part. And I'll stand up for Dark Knight Returns. I'll stand up for Watchmen, as great works in comics. And they definitely earned comic books, a certain level of respect and gravitas that they might not have had in 1986, 87 before these books were released. But I also think they did just as much bad as they did good when you apply everything together. But yeah, it is complicated.
It's well said. I think part of the reason that people don't think of it as a dark and gritty book is because Dave Gibbons' art is so clean. And I really think part of it mentally is just seeing the amount of permanent marker in the Dark Knight Returns. The Klaus Johnson inking is clearly a Sharpie. You're just oh fuck, this is hard. This is a notebook. This is a punk album. This is something that's it feels like an independent book that DC published. And this is actually the independent book that DC published. And the reason I think it's dark and gritty is because you get stuff that you don't need for the story to operate, but you need stuff that makes the world operate. And so I always think about it in a movie, you could show someone's being strangled, right? You could show someone's hands around their neck and their eyes bulging as they gasp their last breath. You can see that in a movie. You can close your eyes, picture that, and oh, that makes sense in a movie. There's that, and then there's showing someone getting strangled, the shadow of two people fighting and strangling each other kind of deal. And I feel a lot of books opt for that over showing the brutality of strangling. And this book, I feel shows the brutality in a way that wasn't ultimately necessary for the story they were telling, but for making the reader feel like they were seeing something they'd never seen before. And so that's why I think this is hands down a dark and gritty book. And I don't mean that pejoratively. I think it's an incredible landmark achievement. I think we all think this is one of the most important pieces of literature of the last 100 years, let alone one of the best comic books ever written, one of the most important documents and artifacts of human creativity, not just the people who make the Superman books also did this by accident. Unequivocally a dark, gritty book, just because it's showed so much shit it didn't have to. And that was the point.
Oh,
it's the even flow of comic books.
Enough with this Pearl Jam. Enough. I give it a Jeremy out of 10. That's the new one, which I actually pretty good.
Right. And you're right. I mean, it is complex and it is nuanced, and there's so much there. We could talk about it forever with George. Thank you so much, George, for being on for the final segment of this week's show, and thank you so much for being on so many past episodes of The Last Comic Shop. If you want to hear George talk about Underboss, we talked about that with the Daredevil run. He was on with Doom Patrol, as he's been on with Squirrel Girl, as we mentioned several times.
Mysterious Polyp, which is one of my favorite books of all time, and I think is that a Chad recommendation?
It was
part of the year, Chad, I believe.
You don't have like the worst taste in comics. That book is like, I want to be buried with that book. I still love it so much. And thank you so much for having me on here. This is one of my favorite shows to listen to. Not just like, I have you up there with like my favorite football podcast to listen to, my favorite basketball, my favorite movies. Like, you are one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. So anytime you want me on, I will happily do it, even if I don't love the book, because I know even if I don't love the book, we're going to have a good discussion about the book that will be productive and mostly respectful, unless Jay and I get a little cheeky. And I'm sorry about that. But thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here for your 200th episode. Thank you so much. That is so sweet of you to even think of me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Well, that's it. We don't have any other guests. We're done with the episode. That's all.
No more recording for all time.
No. But we don't have to record any more Watchmen stuff. I know you don't understand. I think we've been reading Watchmen for like the last year and a half, but it was fun. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you come back next week for episode 201. That's
what
right.
Guy?
We gotta make more of them.
The guy makes watches. He's the Watchman.
Oh, rate and review, subscribe over at www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com so that you don't miss any of the episodes coming up. Not only do we've got Demon Slayer next week, Ethan's going to be coming back for that. We've got Nicole coming back for Blood Hunt. After that, we've got George coming back to do the Venom movie and Donny Cates' Venom after that. We even got Mikey coming back for a whole slew of things leading into December. Tons of stuff. And wow, I gotta say, guys, I have fun every single week reading these comic books with you. So if I am excited about seasons 5, 6, 7, if it always seems like I'm thinking about our next book and what we're going to do next, it's because I cannot wait every week to read another book with you guys. So thank you from the host with the most, Chad, J.A., thanks for this journey thus far, and I hope we can continue it for years to come.
Heck yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the week, dude. We get to hang out and talk about comic books, and there ain't nothing better.
That's right. It is the best book club of all time.
All right. So where can they follow us on the socials, Chad? We might as well go through the spiel.
There we go. At Last Comic Shop, where Twitter, X, Blue Sky, Mastodons.
You got us banned from that one.
Oh, yeah. Threads. Andy loves Threads.
It's a happening place. Lots of folks over there loving our stuff.
There you go. And then you can always go to the website, www.lastcomicshoppodcast.com, where you can find all of the things we're talking about, all the recommendations. And J.A., what sort of fantastic merch do we have in store for the big 200?
Well, we've got always T-shirts, hats, coffee mugs, tote bags, all with our Last Comic Shop logo on it. We've also got various season-themed logos, like a Halloween-themed logo, a Christmas-themed logo. Depending on the season, you can find some special gear. Also, I would say that we have a Watchmen one on, but we would get sued like so hardcore if we had any kind of smiley face with blood on it. Yeah, totally get sued hardcore on that one. Not by Alan Moore, though.
He wouldn't give a flying what we did.
He probably already hates us just for talking about them.
He's like, they keep on promoting this thing that I wish people would stop talking about. But you know what? Maybe we'll have to revisit Watchmen in our 400th episode. We'll come back in like 1,000 years and be like, are we old now? Can we stop doing this? I hope not. I hope that we don't. Thank you so much to everybody that stopped by the show today. Mikey, Nicole, Ethan, George, and everybody that sent us a kudos or congratulations. Wonderful folks out there. Hope you listen to all of their podcasts as well, or buy their comics, because they're all wonderful folks that we really do appreciate greatly, the community that supports us, and we support them right back. Until next week, when we'll be at 201. I was the host with the most, Andy Larson. I was joined by Jay Scott and Chad Smith. And we hope that you stay safe, stay listening, and remember.
In the not-too-distant future, following the rapid succession of World Wars III and IV, plus the hidden horrors of secret World War II, there's not much left. All that remains is a place where folks get together to read and discuss comic books. Sometimes they laugh, sometimes they argue, but they always record and upload their transmissions. You've found one of those transmissions today. Welcome to the last comic shop.
The Last Comic Shop podcast was a 2024 Black Angus production.